Have you ever wondered what really happened in the past? Beyond the pages of textbooks lies a world of fascinating tales, extraordinary figures, and incredible events. Join me as we explore them on Exploring History in Sleep. Get ready to dive into a story where ancient secrets collide with dangerous ambition. Imagine stumbling upon a mysterious wooden box, unaware that it holds the key to a forgotten pact between humans and something more. Our journey follows Alexander, a curious scholar, and Eleanor, his sharp-witted companion, as they unravel the box's cryptic clues. Their quest will lead them through treacherous landscapes, into the hidden world of the Shadowfen and its reclusive people, and ultimately into a direct confrontation with a power-hungry duke who seeks to exploit this ancient magic for his own gain. Think folklore meets political intrigue, with a touch of the supernatural. Expect suspense, danger, and a fight to protect a delicate balance that could determine the fate of an entire kingdom. So, grab your popcorn, settle in, and let's unlock the secrets together. Make sure to subscribe for the next chapter in this unfolding saga. Chapter 1. Gentle Night on the Citadel, the Silent Oath and the First Whispers of Darkness. The deceptive tranquility that can often precede a storm, the way beauty and serenity can mask underlying currents of unease. Imagine a scene of quiet domesticity, a couple bound by affection, yet each harboring unspoken thoughts, subtle anxieties that ripple beneath the surface of their shared life. Observe the gradual introduction of discordant notes into this harmony, the almost imperceptible shadows that begin to lengthen, hinting at a darkness yet to be revealed. This is the atmosphere that envelopes our protagonists, Eleanor and Alexander, on a seemingly ordinary evening in the ancient citadel city of Ethelberg. The last rays of the setting sun, a bruised apricot bleeding into a soft lavender, painted the ancient stone walls of Ethelberg Castle with a fleeting warmth. From their vantage point high within the citadel, Eleanor and Alexander watched the light recede, their hands intertwined, a familiar comfort passing between them. Below, the city began its nightly ritual, the flickering of oil lamps in the narrow streets resembling fallen stars against the deepening twilight. A gentle breeze, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, whispered through the battlements, a sound that usually lulled Eleanor into a peaceful contemplation. Tonight, however, a subtle discord marred the familiar harmony. Eleanor's gaze, usually alight with a quiet joy, held a flicker of something unreadable, a fleeting shadow that Alexander, despite his outward calm, did not fail to notice. He tightened his grip on her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "A penny for your thoughts, Eleanor?" he murmured, his voice a low timbre that often soothed her anxieties. Eleanor offered a small, almost hesitant smile, her eyes still fixed on the darkening horizon. "Just the beauty of the evening, Alexander. It always feels as though the stones themselves are breathing out centuries of stories." Alexander nodded, his gaze searching her face. He knew Eleanor, perhaps better than anyone in this sprawling, often treacherous court. He recognized the subtle nuances in her expressions, the almost imperceptible shifts in her demeanor. Tonight, beneath the surface of her poetic observation, he sensed a disquiet, a faint tremor in the usually steady landscape of her emotions. They had been married for 5 blissful years, a union that had surprised many within the citadel. Alexander, a renowned scholar and advisor to the aging duke, a man known for his sharp intellect and quiet intensity, had found an unexpected solace in Eleanor, a woman of gentle spirit and keen artistic sensibilities. Their days were filled with shared pursuits, the deciphering of ancient texts, the appreciation of her delicate watercolors, the quiet companionship of evenings spent reading by the crackling fire in their chambers. Their life, to all outward appearances, was a tapestry woven with threads of mutual affection and intellectual harmony. Yet, beneath this seemingly perfect surface, both harbored secrets, unspoken anxieties that clung to them like the ever-present dampness of the citadel walls. For Alexander, it was the weight of his position, The constant maneuvering within the Duke's court, the knowledge of simmering resentments and veiled ambitions that threatened to erupt at any moment. For Eleanor, her unease was more nebulous, a growing sense of being watched, a feeling that the idyllic life they had built was somehow fragile, perched precariously on the edge of an unseen precipice. Earlier that day, a traveling merchant, his face etched with a nervous urgency, had pressed a small, intricately carved wooden box into Eleanor's hand during the bustling marketplace. He had uttered a hurried warning, his voice barely above a whisper amidst the clamor of the crowd. "Keep this safe, lady. It holds a truth many would prefer buried." Before Eleanor could question him further, he had vanished into the throng, leaving her with the unsettling weight of the unknown in her hands. She had yet to show the box to Alexander, a hesitation born not of distrust, but of a deep-seated instinct to protect him, to shield their shared happiness from whatever darkness this mysterious object might contain. The weight of that secret now lay heavy in her heart, casting a subtle pall over the beauty of the evening. As the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the citadel into a deeper twilight, a lone figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby battlement. He was cloaked and hooded, his features obscured by the fading light, yet there was an undeniable air of menace about him, a stillness that felt predatory. His gaze, though unseen, seemed to fixate on Eleanor and Alexander, a silent, unseen observer in their private moment. A shiver, cold and unexpected, traced its way down Eleanor's spine. The gentle breeze suddenly felt colder, the sounds of the city below less comforting, more like a hushed murmur of unseen activity. The ancient stones of Ethelberg, which usually whispered tales of the past, now seemed to hold their breath, as if anticipating something ominous. Alexander, sensing her sudden shift in mood, turned his full attention to her, his brow furrowed with concern. "Eleanor? You're pale. What is it?" Eleanor forced another smile, this one less convincing. "Just a chill. The evening air grows colder quickly here." She subtly shifted her body, placing herself slightly between Alexander and the shadowy figure, an instinctive act of protection that did not go unnoticed by her astute husband. He scanned the battlements, his gaze sharp and assessing. He saw the cloaked figure, now melting back into the deeper shadows, but the brief glimpse had been enough to trigger a prickle of unease within him. He had learned to trust Eleanor's instincts, her sensitivity to the subtle currents of the court and the city. If she felt a chill, it was rarely just the temperature of the air. "We should return to our chambers," he said, his voice firm, brooking no argument. He rose, drawing Eleanor up with him, his hand never leaving hers. As they turned to leave the battlements, Eleanor cast one last lingering look at the spot where the cloaked figure had stood, a knot of apprehension tightening in her chest. The beauty of the evening had been tainted, the gentle night now carrying the first faint whispers of a darkness yet to be understood, a shadow that had silently fallen upon their seemingly idyllic world within the ancient citadel of Ethelberg. The silent oath of their love, once a shield against the world, now felt subtly vulnerable, exposed to unseen forces lurking just beyond the edges of their perception. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Duke's Shadow, Unveiling the Merchant's Warning. The subtle art of deception, the way appearances can mask a sinister reality. Imagine navigating a world of courtly intrigue, where every word is weighed, and trust is a fragile commodity. Observe how a seemingly innocuous event can unravel a carefully constructed facade, exposing the dark undercurrents that flow beneath the surface of power. This is the treacherous landscape that Eleanor and Alexander now find themselves traversing within the imposing walls of Ethelberg, the merchant's cryptic warning echoing in the hushed corridors. The warmth of their private chambers, usually a sanctuary of shared intimacy and intellectual discourse, offered little comfort to Eleanor as they retreated from the unsettling encounter on the battlements. The image of the cloaked figure, a silent sentinel in the fading light, lingered in her mind, a prickle of unease that defied rational explanation. Alexander, ever perceptive, noted her disquiet and drew her closer, his arm a reassuring weight around her shoulders as they settled by the crackling fire. "You are troubled, Eleanor," he stated gently, his gaze unwavering. "More than just the evening chill. Tell me what weighs on your heart." Eleanor hesitated, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on the small wooden box hidden within the folds of her gown. The merchant's urgent words replayed in her memory, a stark counterpoint to the peaceful rhythm of their life. She knew Alexander's sharp mind and unwavering loyalty would be invaluable, yet a primal instinct urged her to shield him, at least until she had a clearer understanding of the potential danger. "It was something a merchant gave me in the marketplace today," she began slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the very walls had ears. He seemed frightened. "He pressed this into my hand and warned me to keep it safe, saying it held a truth many would prefer buried." Alexander's brow furrowed, his scholarly curiosity immediately piqued. He reached for her hand, his touch both comforting and inquisitive. "A truth? What manner of truth could inspire such fear?" Eleanor carefully retrieved the box, its smooth, dark wood cool against her palm. It was small, no larger than her hand, with no discernible hinges or opening. Intricate carvings, a series of swirling lines and unfamiliar symbols, adorned its surface. They felt ancient, almost primal, beneath her fingertips. "I don't know," she confessed, her gaze troubled. "He vanished before I could ask any questions. His urgency, it was unsettling. And then that figure on the battlements, it felt connected somehow, though I cannot explain why." Alexander took the box, his keen eyes examining the carvings. He turned it over and over in his hands, his brow furrowing deeper in concentration. "These symbols, they are unlike anything I have seen in the ducal archives. They possess a certain archaic quality, almost predating the common tongue." He rose and carried the box to his writing desk, where a collection of scholarly texts and magnifying glasses lay scattered. Eleanor watched him, her anxiety a palpable presence in the room. She trusted Alexander's intellect implicitly. If anyone could decipher the secrets held within this mysterious object, it was him. Hours passed as Alexander meticulously examined the box, consulting his texts, sketching the unfamiliar symbols in his notebook. The fire crackled and hissed, casting dancing shadows on the walls, amplifying the silence of their intense concentration. Eleanor sat beside him, her gaze flitting between the box and her husband's focused expression. Finally, as the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky a pale gray, Alexander leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I have found a partial match," he announced slowly, his voice laced with a mixture of intrigue and concern. "These symbols bear a resemblance to a dialect spoken by a secluded community dwelling in the northern reaches of the duchy, near the Shadowfen. A people known for their unusual customs and their deep connection to the old ways." Eleanor's heart quickened. The Shadowfen, a place whispered about in hushed tones within the court, a region shrouded in superstition and rumored to be inhabited by those who practiced forgotten arts. "The old ways?" she questioned, a tremor in her voice. "What does that imply?" Alexander's gaze turned serious. "Legends speak of ancient pacts, Eleanor. Agreements made with entities, forces beyond our understanding. Pacts that demand a certain price for their continued favor." A cold dread washed over Eleanor, a chilling echo of the merchant's warning and the unsettling presence on the battlements. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a disturbing picture. Could this small wooden box hold a key to such an ancient and potentially dangerous arrangement? The merchant seemed terrified, Eleanor recalled, her voice barely a whisper. as if he were risking his life simply by giving it to me. Alexander nodded grimly. If this box pertains to such a pact, then it is indeed a dangerous object. Many would prefer such truths to remain buried, as the merchant warned. Unearthing them could have unforeseen consequences. He rose and paced the length of the room, his mind clearly racing. We must be cautious, Eleanor. We do not know who might be watching us, who might have an interest in keeping this box and its secrets hidden. He glanced towards the window, his gaze troubled. That figure on the battlements, it is no coincidence. Someone knows you have this box. A new wave of fear washed over Eleanor, this time sharper, more personal. Their peaceful life, their sanctuary within the citadel, now felt vulnerable, exposed to unseen eyes and unknown threats. The merchant's warning, initially a fleeting unease, now resonated with a chilling significance. They were no longer simply Eleanor and Alexander, a scholar and an artist in their quiet corner of the court. They had become custodians of a dangerous secret, targets in a game they did not yet understand, with unseen players moving in the shadows of the Duke's imposing citadel. The gentle night had truly given way to whispers of darkness, and the silent oath of their love now stood as a fragile shield against a growing and unknown peril. Chapter 3: The Shadowfen's Lore, Unraveling the Archaic Script. The allure of forbidden knowledge, the irresistible pull of the unknown that can lead individuals down perilous paths. Imagine delving into ancient texts and forgotten languages, seeking answers to questions best left unasked. Observe the delicate balance between intellectual curiosity and the potential for uncovering truths that can shatter the foundations of one's world. This is the precarious position in which Alexander now finds himself, the archaic script on the wooden box beckoning him into the shadowy lore of the Shadowfen. The revelation that the symbols on the wooden box might originate from the Shadowfen hung heavy in the air of their chambers, a palpable sense of unease mingling with Alexander's scholarly excitement. The Shadowfen was a land shrouded in mystery, a vast expanse of marshland and tangled woods to the north, largely avoided by the more civilized inhabitants of the duchy. Tales of strange lights, unearthly sounds, and communities practicing ancient, often unsettling, customs were commonplace, dismissed by most as mere folklore. Yet Alexander, with his deep respect for history and the enduring power of tradition, knew that such tales often held a kernel of truth. Driven by a thirst for understanding and a growing sense of urgency, Alexander dedicated himself to deciphering the archaic script. He retrieved his most obscure texts, volumes detailing forgotten languages and regional dialects, their pages brittle with age and their bindings cracked. Eleanor watched him, her anxiety a silent companion in the room, the image of the cloaked figure on the battlements a constant, nagging worry. Days bled into nights as Alexander immersed himself in his research. He meticulously compared the symbols on the box with the scripts documented in his books, his brow furrowed in concentration, his fingers stained with ink. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, transforming their familiar sanctuary into a scholar's isolated retreat. Eleanor, though consumed by worry, found a strange comfort in his focused intensity, a belief that his intellect could unravel the threads of this growing mystery. He discovered fragmented references to the Shadowfen dialect in several obscure texts, often associated with accounts of ancient rituals and interactions with entities described in hushed, fearful tones. The dialect itself seemed to possess a primal quality, its sounds guttural and its structure unlike the more refined languages spoken in the southern duchy. The symbols, he realized, were not merely letters but possessed a deeper, almost totemic significance, each one seemingly imbued with a specific meaning or power. Slowly, painstakingly, Alexander began to piece together the meaning of the symbols. He discovered that they formed a series of interconnected phrases, a fragmented narrative that hinted at an ancient agreement, a pact forged between the inhabitants of the Shadowfen and a powerful entity dwelling within the murky depths of the Fawn itself. The language was deliberately cryptic, filled with metaphors and allusions, as if intended to conceal its true meaning from outsiders. One phrase, repeated several times, sent a chill down Alexander's spine. The silent oath binds the land, and the offering keeps the shadow at bay. Another spoke of a heartwood and a song of appeasement, suggesting a ritualistic element to the pact. The fragmented narrative painted a picture of a community living in a delicate balance with a powerful, unseen force, their survival dependent on upholding the terms of this ancient agreement. As Alexander delved deeper, he found references to a specific time of year, a celestial alignment when the veil between worlds was said to be thin, and when the offering was traditionally made. He cross-referenced this information with astronomical charts and historical calendars, realizing that this alignment was fast approaching. The urgency of the situation became starkly clear. The merchant's fear, the cloaked figure's watchful presence, and the archaic script on the box all pointed towards a present danger, a potential disruption of this ancient pact that could have dire consequences for the inhabitants of the Shadowfen, and perhaps for those who now possessed this knowledge. Alexander shared his findings with Eleanor, his voice grave. The merchant's warning. It was not mere paranoia. This box contains knowledge of an ancient agreement, a pact with something powerful. And someone clearly wants this knowledge to remain hidden. Eleanor listened, her initial apprehensions solidifying into a cold certainty. The cloaked figure on the battlements now took on a more sinister significance. They were being watched, their every move likely scrutinized by those who sought to protect the secrets of the Shadowfen. "We must understand the nature of this pact," Eleanor said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "What is the offering? Who is the entity? And why was this box given to me?" Alexander nodded, his mind already racing, formulating a plan. "The merchant. He must have believed you were someone who could be trusted with this information, someone who might be able to intervene. But we are outsiders, Eleanor. To interfere in such an ancient arrangement, it could be perilous." Despite the inherent danger, a sense of responsibility settled upon them. The thought of a community living under the shadow of an ancient pact, their lives dictated by the demands of an unknown entity, resonated deeply with their sense of justice and their shared humanity. They had stumbled upon a secret that could hold the key to the well-being of others, and they could not simply ignore it. Their immediate priority was to learn more about the Shadowfen and its customs. Alexander recalled fragmented accounts of scholars who had dared to venture into the region centuries ago, their observations often dismissed as fanciful tales. He resolved to seek out these obscure records, hoping to find further clues about the nature of the pact and the entity it involved. As Alexander immersed himself once more in his research, Eleanor found herself increasingly looking over her shoulder. The image of the cloaked figure burned into her memory. The gentle night on the citadel had indeed given way to whispers of darkness, and the silent oath of their love now felt like a fragile beacon in the face of an encroaching and unknown shadow emanating from the mysterious lore of the Shadowfen. The archaic script on the wooden box was no longer just a scholarly puzzle. It was a potential key to a dangerous and ancient secret, and their possession of it had irrevocably altered their lives. Chapter 4. Footprints in the Archives. Echoes of the Shadowfen Scholars. The enduring power of the written word, the way voices from the past can reach across centuries, offering insights into forgotten times and hidden truths. Imagine the meticulous work of a scholar, sifting through dusty tomes and faded manuscripts, piecing together fragments of history that others have dismissed or ignored. Observe the growing sense of connection to those who came before, a shared pursuit of knowledge that transcends time. This is the path Alexander now embarks upon, his quest to understand the Shadowfen leading him deep into the forgotten corners of the ducal archives. Driven by the cryptic narrative gleaned from the archaic script and the looming approach of the celestial alignment, Alexander resolved to delve into the ducal archives, a labyrinthine repository of historical records, scholarly treatises, and forgotten lore. He knew that any understanding of the Shadowfen's ancient pact likely lay buried within these dusty tomes, perhaps dismissed as fanciful tales or relegated to the obscure corners of forgotten scholars. He spent the following days immersed in the hushed silence of the archives, the air thick with the scent of aged parchment and leather-bound volumes. Eleanor, though her anxiety about the cloaked figure and the unknown dangers intensified, understood the urgency of Alexander's research and offered him unwavering support, often accompanying him to the archives and meticulously cataloging potential leads. Alexander focused his search on accounts of the Northern Duchy, particularly those predating the current ruling family. He sought mentions of the Shadowfen, its inhabitants, and any unusual interactions with the outside world. Many accounts were indeed steeped in superstition, describing strange encounters with will-o'-the-wisps, monstrous creatures lurking in the mist, and communities practicing bizarre rituals. However, amidst these fantastical tales, Alexander began to discern recurring motifs and consistent details that hinted at a deeper reality. He found the fragmented journals of a 15th-century scholar named Elias Thorne, a man ostracized by the ducal court for his unconventional theories and his fascination with the primitive cultures of the northern territories. Thorne had spent several years living amongst the inhabitants of the Shadowfen, documenting their language, customs, and beliefs. His writings, though often colored by his own biases and the prevailing superstitions of his time, provided invaluable insights into the region's history. Thorne described a people deeply connected to the land, their lives governed by the cycles of nature and a profound respect for the powerful forces they believed resided within the Fun. He wrote of their intricate system of rituals and offerings, meticulously performed at specific times and locations, intended to appease a powerful entity they referred to as the Funwalker or the Silent Guardian. Thorne's descriptions of this entity were vague and often contradictory, ranging from a benevolent protector of the land to a demanding and potentially wrathful spirit. Intriguingly, Thorne also documented a song of binding and a ritual of appeasement, the details of which resonated with the fragmented phrases Alexander had deciphered from the wooden box. He described a specific heartwood tree, located deep within the Shadowfen, which served as a focal point for these rituals, a place where the veil between the human world and the realm of the Fawn Walker was believed to be thin. Another key discovery came from the correspondence of a 17th-century cartographer, Isabella Rossi, who had been commissioned by the Duke of her time to map the northern territories. Rossi's maps were remarkably detailed, and her accompanying letters contained observations about the local inhabitants that went beyond mere cartography. She noted their deep-seated fear of certain areas within the Shadowfen, their adherence to specific traditions, and their reluctance to speak openly about their beliefs. Rossi's letters also mentioned a specific celestial alignment that the Fenlanders held in particular reverence, a time when they would gather at a hidden location within the Fun for a significant ceremony. She had been unable to witness this ceremony firsthand, but her descriptions of the hushed anticipation and the palpable sense of ancient power surrounding it were deeply evocative. Alexander realized that this was likely the same celestial alignment mentioned in the archaic script. Piecing together the fragmented accounts of Thorne and Rossi, Alexander began to form a clearer picture of the Shadowfen's ancient pact. It seemed to be a reciprocal agreement, where the Fenlanders offered something, perhaps a specific resource, a symbolic tribute, or even a periodic sacrifice, in exchange for the entity's protection or favor, ensuring the continued prosperity and stability of their community within the challenging environment of the Fun. The Silent Oath likely referred to the unspoken understanding that bound the two parties together, a tradition passed down through generations. The wooden box, Alexander surmised, likely contained a record of this pact, perhaps a more complete version of the fragmented narrative he had deciphered, or perhaps a key to understanding the specific terms of the agreement. The merchant's fear suggested that this knowledge was now considered dangerous, perhaps because the balance of the pact had been disrupted, or perhaps because external forces sought to exploit or dismantle it. As Alexander emerged from the archives, his mind buzzing with his discoveries, Eleanor met him with a worried expression. "There have been inquiries," she said softly, her gaze darting nervously around the corridor. "Two men, cloaked and bearing the Duke's insignia, asked about you. They seemed interested in your current research." A cold dread gripped Alexander. The cloaked figure on the battlements had not been a random encounter. Someone within the ducal court was aware of their possession of the box and their interest in the Shadowfen. The stakes had just been raised. Their quest for knowledge had now placed them directly in the path of unseen and potentially powerful adversaries. The echoes of the Shadowfen scholars, reaching across the centuries, had not only illuminated a forgotten past but had also cast a long shadow into their present, a shadow that now seemed to be closing in. Their silent oath to each other now included a new, unspoken vow, to protect the truth they had unearthed, no matter the cost. Chapter 5: The Duke's Inquiry, a Web of Courtly Intrigue. The intricate dance of power within a royal court, where alliances shift like the desert sands and suspicion festers beneath a veneer of civility. Imagine navigating this treacherous landscape, where a simple inquiry can mask a veiled threat, and knowledge itself becomes a dangerous weapon. Observe how the pursuit of truth can inadvertently draw one into the heart of political machinations, where the lines between friend and foe become increasingly blurred. This is the perilous arena into which Alexander and Eleanor are now drawn, the Duke's sudden interest in his research casting a long shadow over their quest for understanding the Shadowfen. The news of the Duke's inquiry sent a chill deeper than the archive's cold stone through Alexander. The aging ruler, usually preoccupied with matters of state and the endless squabbles of his ambitious nobles, rarely took personal interest in the scholarly pursuits of his advisors. The fact that he had specifically asked about Alexander's current research, and had sent two of his cloaked guards to inquire, spoke volumes. It suggested that their exploration of the Shadowfen secrets had not gone unnoticed, and that powerful eyes were now watching them. Alexander and Eleanor retreated to their chambers, the familiar comfort of their sanctuary now tinged with a palpable unease. They discussed the implications of the Duke's interest, carefully weighing the possible reasons behind it. Was it mere curiosity? Or did it signify something more sinister, a desire to control or suppress the knowledge they were uncovering? "The Duke has always been pragmatic," Alexander mused, pacing the length of their chamber. "He values stability above all else." The mention of ancient pacts and powerful entities. It could be seen as a threat to the order he so carefully maintains. Eleanor nodded, her gaze troubled. "Or perhaps," she suggested softly, "someone has already informed him of the merchant of the box. Someone who fears what we might discover." The thought hung heavy in the air. The cloaked figure on the battlements, the Duke's sudden inquiry. It painted a picture of a hidden network, a web of influence that extended far beyond their awareness. They were no longer simply seeking knowledge. They were treading on dangerous ground, potentially disturbing secrets that powerful individuals wished to keep buried. Alexander decided that a direct approach, albeit a carefully measured one, was necessary. He resolved to present his research to the Duke, but to frame it in a way that emphasized the historical and scholarly aspects, downplaying the potential implications for the present. He hoped to gauge the Duke's reaction, to discern whether his interest stemmed from genuine curiosity or something more menacing. The following morning, Alexander was summoned to the Duke's private study, a grand chamber filled with tapestries depicting heroic battles and shelves overflowing with ancient texts. The Duke, a man whose once imposing figure was now stooped with age but whose eyes still held a keen intelligence, sat behind a heavy oak desk, his expression unreadable. "Alexander," the Duke greeted him, his voice raspy but firm. "I hear you have been delving into the history of the Northern Territories." "The Shadowfen, I believe." Alexander bowed respectfully. "Your Grace is well informed. My research has indeed led me to examine historical accounts of the Shadowfen, its inhabitants, and their traditions." "And what have you found?" the Duke inquired, his gaze steady. Alexander carefully presented his findings, focusing on the accounts of Elias Thorne and Isabella Rossi, emphasizing their historical context and the often superstitious nature of their writings. He spoke of archaic dialects, forgotten rituals, and the beliefs of a secluded community, but he deliberately avoided any direct mention of the wooden box or the deciphered phrases that hinted at a present-day pact. The Duke listened intently, his expression remaining impassive. He asked a few pointed questions about the dating of the texts and the credibility of the scholars, but he did not press for any connection to the present day. As Alexander concluded his presentation, the Duke steepled his fingers, his gaze thoughtful. "Interesting, historical curiosities, no doubt. But I trust your primary duties to the court have not suffered due to these diversions." "Not at all, Your Grace," Alexander assured him. "My research remains a secondary pursuit, undertaken in my own time." The Duke nodded slowly. "See that it remains so, Alexander. The stability of this duchy is paramount. We have little patience for those who stir up old tales and unsettle the minds of the populace with talk of ancient agreements." His tone held a subtle warning, a veiled edge that did not escape Alexander's notice. Dismissed from the Duke's presence, Alexander returned to Eleanor, his mind troubled. The Duke's reaction had been ambiguous. While he had not explicitly forbidden the research, his words carried a clear undertone of disapproval, a suggestion that such inquiries were unwelcome. "He knows something, Eleanor," Alexander said, his voice low. "Or at least, he suspects." His interest was not merely academic. He spoke of maintaining stability, of not unsettling the populace. It was a warning. Eleanor's apprehension deepened. The Duke's involvement raised the stakes considerably. They were no longer dealing with an unknown threat lurking in the shadows. They were now potentially crossing paths with the highest authority in the duchy. "What do we do?" Eleanor asked, her voice laced with concern. "Do we abandon our research? Pretend we know nothing?" Alexander shook his head, his resolve hardening. "No. The merchant chose you for a reason, Eleanor. And the fragmented narrative on that box, it speaks of a community living under a silent oath. We cannot simply turn a blind eye, especially with the celestial alignment drawing near. We must proceed, but with greater caution." They agreed to be more discreet in their inquiries, to share their findings with no one, and to be vigilant for any signs of surveillance. Alexander would continue his research into the Shadowfen's lore, focusing on any information that might shed light on the nature of the pact and the approaching celestial alignment. Eleanor, meanwhile, would try to recall any details about the merchant, any distinguishing features or anything he might have said that could offer a clue to his identity or his reasons for entrusting her with the box. The Duke's inquiry had cast a pall over their pursuit of knowledge, transforming it into a clandestine operation conducted in the shadows of the very court they served. The web of courtly intrigue had begun to ensnare them, and they knew that their next steps could have far-reaching and potentially dangerous consequences. The echoes of the Shadowfen scholars had led them to a precipice, and the silent oath they now shared was not just one of love, but one of shared risk and a determination to uncover the truth, no matter who stood in their way. Chapter 6. A Face in the Crowd, Tracing the Merchant's Path. The fleeting nature of memory, the way significant encounters can fade into the background of our daily lives. Imagine the challenge of recalling a single face from a bustling crowd, a voice lost in the clamor of the marketplace. Observe the determined effort to piece together fragmented recollections, the sifting through sensory details in search of a crucial clue. This is the task that now occupies Eleanor, the weight of the mysterious wooden box and the Duke's veiled warning spurring her to revisit the chaotic scene of their encounter with the enigmatic merchant. The Duke's unsettling inquiry hung over them like a persistent fog, a constant reminder of the unseen eyes that might be watching their every move. While Alexander immersed himself once more in the dusty chronicles of the ducal archives, Eleanor felt compelled to revisit the marketplace, the chaotic heart of Ethelberg where the mysterious merchant had entrusted her with the wooden box. Perhaps, amidst the familiar sights and sounds, a forgotten detail, a fleeting impression, might resurface, offering a clue to his identity or his purpose. The marketplace was a vibrant tapestry of sights, sounds, and smells. Vendors hawked their wares, their voices rising above the bleating of livestock and the chatter of bartering customers. The air was thick with the aroma of spices, freshly baked bread, and the less appealing scent of unwashed bodies and animal dung. Navigating the throngs of people, Eleanor felt a sense of being swallowed by the anonymity of the crowd, the very same anonymity that had likely shielded the merchant. She began her search methodically, revisiting the stalls she remembered browsing near on that fateful day. She spoke to the vendors, describing the merchant as best she could recall. A man of height, with weathered features and anxious eyes, his hands calloused as if from travel. Most remembered countless faces passing through their stalls each day, their memories blurred by the constant influx of people. Days turned into a week, Eleanor tirelessly retracing her steps, her initial hope gradually giving way to a gnawing frustration. The merchant seemed to have vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the enigmatic wooden box and his hurried warning. Yet, Eleanor refused to give up. She felt a growing sense of responsibility, not only to Alexander and their shared predicament but also to the unknown truth the box contained. One afternoon, while revisiting a stall selling exotic fabrics, a detail sparked in her memory. She recalled the merchant clutching a distinctive pouch, made of rough-spun cloth and embroidered with a peculiar symbol, a stylized serpent coiled around a single blooming flower. It was a detail she had dismissed as insignificant at the time, but now it felt like a potential thread in the unraveling mystery. She described the pouch to the fabric vendor, an elderly woman with shrewd eyes and a sharp memory. The woman's gaze sharpened. The serpent and the bloom. That is the mark of the itinerants from the eastern passes. They come to Ethelberg only a few times a year, bringing silks and spices from distant lands. A surge of hope coursed through Eleanor. The merchant was not a local. He was an outsider, his presence in Ethelberg likely temporary. This offered a new avenue of inquiry. Perhaps someone remembered his brief stay, his interactions, or his eventual departure. Eleanor spent the next few days frequenting the inns and taverns near the marketplace, places where travelers often sought lodging and respite. She described the merchant and his distinctive pouch to the innkeepers and patrons, her persistence slowly yielding results. An old stable hand at the Crooked Tankard recalled a man fitting the description. He remembered the pouch, noting the unusual symbol. The merchant had stayed for only a night, arriving travel-worn and leaving before dawn, heading north in the direction of the Shadowfen. The stable hand also recalled a brief conversation he had overheard between the merchant and another man, a gruff individual with the Duke's livery on his worn leather jerkin. The stable hand hadn't paid much attention at the time, but now, piecing together his fragmented recollections, a chilling detail emerged. He remembered the man in the Duke's livery asking the merchant about a package he was to deliver to a lady in the citadel. The merchant had seemed nervous, eager to be on his way. The pieces clicked into place with a disturbing clarity. The merchant had been tasked with delivering the wooden box to Eleanor, and someone within the Duke's own guard had been aware of this transaction. The cloaked figure on the battlements was likely connected to this individual, their presence a silent warning or perhaps an attempt to retrieve the box. Eleanor relayed her findings to Alexander, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and renewed apprehension. They now had a potential lead on the merchant's identity and a clearer indication that their actions were being monitored by someone within the Duke's inner circle. "The eastern passes," Alexander mused, his brow furrowed. "That is a long journey. Why would someone from so far away be entrusted with such a sensitive delivery?" "And the man in the Duke's livery," Eleanor added, her voice troubled. "It suggests that the Duke's inquiry might be more than just curiosity. Someone close to him is involved." The web of intrigue surrounding the wooden box was growing increasingly complex, stretching from the remote Shadowfen to the heart of the ducal court. The merchant's path, though fleeting, had provided a crucial thread, linking their seemingly isolated predicament to the intricate and potentially dangerous world of Ethelberg's political machinations. Their quest for knowledge had inadvertently drawn them into a game with powerful and hidden players, and the silent oath they shared now carried the weight of this newfound danger. The whispers of darkness had become a tangible presence, and the gentle night of their initial discovery felt like a distant, almost forgotten memory. Chapter 7. The Eastern Passes, A Journey into the Unknown. The allure of distant lands, the draw of the unfamiliar that pulls adventurers and seekers across vast distances. Imagine the arduous journey through treacherous terrain, the encounters with strange cultures and unknown dangers. Observe the unwavering determination to follow a lead, however faint, in the pursuit of a vital truth. This is the path Alexander and Eleanor now contemplate, the stable hand's recollection of the merchant heading towards the eastern passes igniting a perilous new direction in their quest. The revelation that the merchant had journeyed from the distant eastern passes, a region largely unknown and considered wild by many within the duchy, presented both a challenge and a glimmer of hope. The eastern passes were a sprawling network of rugged mountains and isolated valleys, home to nomadic tribes and communities with customs far removed from those of Ethelberg. It was a daunting prospect, a journey into the unfamiliar, yet it offered the potential to uncover the merchant's origins, his connections, and perhaps the true significance of the wooden box. Alexander, ever the scholar, pored over his maps, his fingers tracing the jagged lines that represented the eastern mountain range. Information about the region was scarce and often unreliable, filled with fantastical tales of mythical creatures and savage peoples. However, a few older texts hinted at ancient trade routes that snaked through the passes, connecting the duchy to lands even further east, lands rumored to hold forgotten knowledge and powerful secrets. "The itinerants," Alexander mused, recalling the fabric vendor's words. "They are said to travel these routes, bringing goods from beyond the mountains. If we could find others who have encountered this merchant, perhaps we could learn more about his purpose here." Eleanor, though apprehensive about venturing into such an unknown territory, recognized the necessity of following this lead. The Duke's veiled warning and the presence of his guards suggested that remaining in Ethelberg while they investigated would only place them in greater danger. A journey to the eastern passes offered a chance to step out of the immediate scrutiny and potentially uncover allies or information that could help them understand the larger picture. "It will be dangerous," Eleanor acknowledged, her voice laced with concern. "We know little of those lands or the people who dwell there." "That is true," Alexander replied, his gaze firm. "But staying here, under the Duke's watchful eye, is perhaps even more perilous. We are playing a game with unknown rules and unseen opponents. To understand the game, we may need to venture onto their playing field." They decided to make preparations for a discreet journey. Alexander, feigning an interest in acquiring rare texts from monasteries nestled in the foothills of the eastern mountains, secured the Duke's reluctant permission for a small expedition. They gathered essential supplies, sturdy horses, and hired a few trusted guards, men who had served Alexander loyally in the past and could be relied upon for their discretion. The journey was arduous. The well-maintained roads of the duchy soon gave way to rough tracks that wound their way through increasingly rugged terrain. The air grew thinner as they ascended into the foothills, the landscape transforming into a dramatic vista of towering peaks and deep valleys. They encountered small, isolated communities, their customs and language distinct from those of Ethelberg, offering glimpses into a different way of life. As they ventured deeper into the eastern passes, they began to encounter other travelers, hardy mountain folk, weathered traders leading pack animals laden with goods, and occasionally, groups of itinerants, their colorful garments and exotic wares setting them apart. Eleanor carefully observed each of these encounters, searching for any sign of the merchant with the serpent and bloom pouch. Weeks passed without success, and a sense of discouragement began to creep in. The eastern passes seemed vast and endless, the possibility of finding one specific traveler in this sprawling wilderness feeling increasingly remote. Yet, Alexander's scholarly curiosity and Eleanor's unwavering determination kept them pressing onward. One evening, as they sought shelter in a small, remote inn nestled in a high mountain valley, Eleanor noticed a familiar symbol etched into the wooden counter, a stylized serpent coiled around a single, blooming flower. Her heart quickened. She inquired about the symbol with the innkeeper, a gruff but mountain man. He explained that it was the mark of a particular group of itinerants who frequented this valley a few times a year, known for their knowledge of herbs and their trade in rare spices and silks from the Far East. He recalled a man matching the merchant's description passing through a few months prior, heading further into the passes. The innkeeper also mentioned a local legend associated with that symbol, a tale of an ancient pact between the mountain people and a guardian spirit of the high peaks, a pact symbolized by the serpent's wisdom and the flower's fleeting beauty. The legend spoke of a delicate balance, maintained through rituals and offerings, and the potential for dire consequences if that balance were disrupted. Alexander and Eleanor exchanged a significant look. The pieces were beginning to align. The merchant's origins in the eastern passes, the symbol on his pouch, and the local legend of an ancient pact all seemed to point towards a connection to the Shadowfen's own ancient agreement. Emboldened by this new lead, they continued their journey deeper into the eastern passes, their hope rekindled. The arduous trek through the rugged mountains now felt less like a random search and more like a purposeful journey towards a vital truth. The whispers of darkness that had begun in Ethelberg now echoed in the wind-swept peaks, carrying the promise of answers and the potential for even greater danger in the unknown lands ahead. The silent oath they shared had led them far from the familiar comforts of the citadel, into a world of ancient lore and hidden secrets, where the next encounter could hold the key to everything. Chapter 8. The Hermit's Wisdom, Echoes of the Heartwood Song. The secluded wisdom often found in those who dwell apart from the clamor of society, individuals who dedicate their lives to contemplation and the study of ancient lore. Imagine seeking guidance from such a figure, hoping to glean insights that have been lost or forgotten by the wider world. Observe the delicate exchange of knowledge, the cautious unveiling of secrets held close for generations. This is the encounter Alexander and Eleanor now seek in the remote peaks of the eastern passes, the innkeeper's tale hinting at a solitary sage who might hold the key to understanding the serpent and bloom's significance. The innkeeper's mention of a hermit, an old sage who dwelled in the highest, most secluded peaks of the eastern passes and was said to possess a deep understanding of the local lore, including the significance of the serpent and bloom, ignited a new sense of purpose in Alexander and Eleanor. The arduous journey through the mountains now had a specific destination, a potential source of the very knowledge they sought. The ascent was challenging, the paths becoming increasingly steep and treacherous. The air grew thin and biting, and the landscape transformed into a stark panorama of jagged rocks and wind-swept crags. Their hired guards, hardy as they were, began to grumble about the seemingly endless climb, but Alexander's unwavering determination and Eleanor's quiet resolve kept them pressing onward. After several days of relentless travel, following the innkeeper's vague directions and the occasional cairn of stones that marked the ancient paths, they finally reached a small, sheltered plateau nestled high amongst the peaks. A simple stone hut, built into the side of a towering cliff face, stood as the solitary dwelling of the hermit. Smoke curled lazily from a crude chimney, a testament to the life within. As they approached the hut, a figure emerged, his form as weathered and rugged as the mountains themselves. He was an old man, his face a road map of wrinkles etched by time and the harsh mountain winds, his eyes a piercing blue that seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries. He wore simple-spun robes and leaned heavily on a gnarled wooden staff. Alexander approached respectfully, bowing his head. "Venerable sage," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. "We are travelers from the west, seeking your wisdom. We have encountered a symbol, a serpent coiled around a blooming flower, and we have been told that you might understand its meaning." The hermit's gaze, sharp and assessing, rested on them for a long moment. He studied their faces, as if trying to discern the sincerity of their quest. Finally, he nodded slowly. "The serpent and the bloom. It is a mark known to these mountains. A symbol of the ancient pact." A wave of anticipation washed over Alexander and Eleanor. They had found their source. The hermit invited them into his humble dwelling, a small, single room filled with the scent of dried herbs and wood smoke. Scrolls of parchment lined the walls, filled with intricate script and drawings. A small fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the aged faces gathered around it. Over simple fare of dried fruit and mountain cheese, the hermit spoke of the ancient pact, his voice a low, steady murmur that filled the silence of the mountain dwelling. He recounted the legend of the mountain people and the guardian spirit of the peaks, a powerful entity whose favor ensured the prosperity and protection of the land. The serpent, he explained, represented the spirit's wisdom and its connection to the earth's deep currents, while the bloom symbolized the fleeting beauty of life and the cyclical nature of existence. He spoke of the rituals and offerings performed to honor the spirit, ensuring the delicate balance of the pact. He described the Song of Binding, a melody passed down through generations, believed to appease the spirit and maintain the harmony between the human and the spiritual realms. He also mentioned the heartwood tree, a sacred place high in the mountains, where the veil between worlds was said to be thinnest. Alexander carefully showed the hermit the sketches he had made of the archaic script from the wooden box. The old man's eyes widened slightly as he examined them. "This script, it is the ancient tongue of the Fenlanders. It speaks of a pact similar to our own, an agreement with a guardian of their wetlands. The symbols are related, though distinct, reflecting the different nature of the land and the spirit." He explained that the serpent and bloom symbol, while central to the mountain pact, had variations in other regions, each adapted to the specific environment and the entity involved. The connection between the mountain pact and the Fenland pact, he revealed, was ancient, a testament to a time when the peoples of these lands shared a deeper understanding of the spiritual forces that shaped their world. The hermit's wisdom offered a crucial link in the chain of their understanding. The merchant's origins in the eastern passes, his possession of the box with the Fenland script, and the shared symbolism of the ancient pacts suggested a connection between these seemingly disparate regions and their respective guardians. Alexander then described the merchant's hurried delivery of the box and the cloaked figure on the battlements. The hermit's expression grew grave. "If the balance of the pact is disturbed," he warned, his voice taking on a more urgent tone, "or if outsiders seek to interfere, the consequences can be severe. The guardians are powerful, and their wrath can be terrible." He explained that the approaching celestial alignment was a significant time for both pacts, a period of renewal and reaffirmation. Any disruption during this time could have far-reaching and potentially catastrophic effects. As the days turned into nights in the hermit's secluded dwelling, Alexander and Eleanor gleaned invaluable knowledge about the ancient pacts, their symbolism, and their significance. The hermit's wisdom, born from a life dedicated to understanding the rhythms of the mountains and the echoes of the past, provided them with a crucial framework for interpreting the mysteries surrounding the wooden box and the growing sense of danger that enveloped them. Their journey into the unknown eastern passes had led them to a solitary sage whose insights now illuminated the path ahead, a path that seemed increasingly fraught with peril. The silent oath they shared now carried the weight of this ancient knowledge, a responsibility to protect not only themselves but also the delicate balance of these forgotten agreements. Chapter 9. The Crossroads of Choice, a Perilous Descent. The weight of responsibility that falls upon those who possess forbidden knowledge, the moral dilemma of whether to intervene in ancient traditions or to remain a silent observer. Imagine standing at a crossroads, each path fraught with potential danger and unforeseen consequences. Observe the agonizing process of making a decision that could alter the fate of others, guided by conscience and the limited understanding of forces beyond comprehension. This is the difficult juncture at which Alexander and Eleanor now find themselves, the hermit's warnings echoing in their minds as they contemplate their next move. The hermit's grave warnings about the potential consequences of disturbing the ancient pacts weighed heavily on Alexander and Eleanor as they prepared for their descent from the mountain peaks. The knowledge they had gained about the interconnectedness of the fenland and mountain agreements and the significance of the approaching celestial alignment painted a picture of a delicate balance that could be easily shattered. "We must return to Ethelberg," Alexander stated, his voice firm despite the turmoil in his heart. The Duke's interest, the cloaked figure. It all suggests that someone there seeks to manipulate or control the power of the Shadowfen Pact. We need to understand their motives and prevent any disruption. Eleanor nodded, her brow furrowed with concern. But the hermit warned us against interference. He spoke of the Guardian's wrath. Are we not risking unleashing something terrible by involving ourselves further? "We are already involved, Eleanor," Alexander countered, his gaze resolute. "The merchant sought you out for a reason. The box is in our possession. To do nothing would be to ignore a potential crisis, a silent plea for help from a community we now know is bound by an ancient oath." They spent a final morning with the hermit, seeking his further guidance. He reiterated the importance of respecting the ancient ways but acknowledged that sometimes, when the balance was threatened by external forces, intervention, if carefully considered, might be necessary. He cautioned them to tread lightly, to seek understanding before action, and to respect the power of the Guardians. The descent from the mountains was fraught with its own perils. The steep, winding paths were treacherous, and the biting wind seemed to carry the hermit's warnings. They traveled with a heightened sense of urgency, the approaching celestial alignment looming like a deadline. As they made their way back towards the more settled regions, they encountered small groups of mountain folk, their faces etched with a quiet reverence as they spoke of the approaching time of the Great Conjunction, a period of heightened spiritual energy and renewal. Their words reinforced the hermit's warnings about the significance of this celestial event. The journey back to Ethelberg felt different. The beauty of the landscape was now tinged with a sense of foreboding, the towering peaks seeming to watch their progress with silent judgment. The weight of the wooden box, now understood to be a vessel of ancient knowledge and potential power, felt heavier in Eleanor's keeping. Upon their return to Ethelberg, they were immediately struck by a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the citadel. The usual bustle of courtly life seemed muted, replaced by an undercurrent of tension. Whispers circulated in the corridors, hushed conversations abruptly ceasing as they approached. The Duke's guard seemed more watchful, their gazes lingering on Alexander with a newfound intensity. It was clear that their absence had been noted, and their return was not met with indifference. The web of courtly intrigue had tightened around them. Alexander sought out his trusted contacts within the court, individuals who had previously provided him with discreet information. He inquired about any unusual activity, any whispers regarding the Shadowfen or ancient pacts. The responses he received were guarded and hesitant, but a pattern began to emerge. Rumors of increased activity near the Shadowfen, unusual movements of the Duke's forces in the northern territories, and hushed discussions among certain members of the court hinted at a growing interest in the region. One of Alexander's contacts, a low-ranking scribe with keen ears, revealed a disturbing piece of information. He had overheard a conversation between two of the Duke's advisors, discussing a plan to secure the resources of the Shadowfen during the upcoming celestial alignment, mentioning the exploitation of some ancient power that lay dormant within the Fun. The scribe's words sent a chill through Alexander. It seemed that the Duke's interest was not merely about maintaining stability. It was about seizing control, potentially disrupting the delicate balance of the ancient pact for his own gain. Alexander shared this alarming information with Eleanor. The crossroads of their choice had become starkly defined. They could remain silent, heeding the hermit's warning against interference, and risk allowing the Duke to unleash unforeseen and potentially catastrophic consequences by disrupting the Shadowfen pact. Or they could act, using the knowledge they now possessed to try and protect the ancient agreement and the communities bound by it, even if it meant defying the Duke and placing themselves in grave danger. The silent oath they had made to each other in the gentle night on the citadel now carried a far greater weight. It was no longer just about their love and shared life. It was about a shared responsibility to a hidden world and the potential for a terrible darkness to be unleashed if they failed to act. The whispers of darkness had become a looming threat, and their perilous descent from the wisdom of the mountains had led them directly into the heart of a dangerous and unfolding crisis. The time for contemplation was over. The time for a decision, and potentially for action, had arrived. Chapter 10. The Gathering Storm. A conspiracy unveiled. The insidious nature of unchecked ambition, the way the lust for power can corrupt even those who once held noble intentions. Imagine the meticulous planning of a conspiracy, the careful manipulation of events to achieve a desired outcome, regardless of the cost. Observe how fragments of information, pieced together with diligence and insight, can reveal a terrifying truth hidden beneath a veneer of legitimacy. This is the dark tapestry Alexander and Eleanor are now beginning to unravel, the scribe's overheard conversation illuminating the Duke's sinister designs on the Shadowfen. The scribe's chilling revelation hung in the air of their chambers, a suffocating weight that overshadowed the familiar comfort of their sanctuary. The Duke's interest in the Shadowfen was no longer a matter of mere curiosity or a desire for stability. It was a calculated scheme to exploit the ancient power residing within the Fun, a power that the hermit had warned was best left undisturbed. The approaching celestial alignment, a time of heightened spiritual energy and renewal for the pact, was likely the key to the Duke's sinister plan. "He doesn't understand what he's meddling with," Alexander said, his voice a low growl of anger and concern. The hermit's warnings. The balance of these ancient pacts is fragile. To disrupt it for personal gain. The consequences could be catastrophic, not just for the Fenlanders, but perhaps for the entire duchy. Eleanor's face was pale, her eyes wide with apprehension. But what power could he possibly hope to gain from the Shadowfen? And how does the wooden box fit into his plans? Alexander paced the length of the room, his mind racing, piecing together the fragments of information they had gathered. The archaic script on the box, the merchant's desperate delivery, the cloaked figures, the Duke's inquiry, and now the scribe's overheard conversation. They formed a disturbing pattern, a conspiracy slowly being unveiled. "The Heartwood and the Song of Appeasement," Alexander murmured, recalling the phrases from the archaic script and the hermit's explanation. "They are central to the Shadowfen pact, the focal point of their rituals." Perhaps the Duke believes that by controlling the Heartwood or disrupting the song during the celestial alignment, he can somehow harness the power of the Fawn Walker. But what kind of power? Eleanor pressed, her voice trembling slightly. Alexander could only speculate. Ancient pacts often involved an exchange of protection or prosperity for something offered in return. If the Duke could seize control of the offering or manipulate the song, he might believe he could command the Fawn Walker's power for his own ends, perhaps to consolidate his rule, to gain access to some hidden resource within the Fawn, or even to extend his influence beyond the duchy's borders. The scribe mentioned securing resources, Eleanor recalled. Perhaps there is something of value within the Shadowfen that the Duke seeks to exploit, something tied to this ancient power. Their conversation turned to the man in the Duke's livery whom the stable hand had overheard speaking with the merchant. This individual now took on a new significance. He was likely the Duke's agent, tasked with ensuring the delivery of the box and perhaps monitoring Eleanor. The cloaked figures were likely his men, their presence a constant surveillance and a potential threat. "We need to understand the Duke's network," Alexander said, his gaze hardening with determination. "Who are his key advisors in this scheme? Who is aware of his plans for the Shadowfen?" They decided to use Alexander's remaining trusted contacts within the court to gather more information. Discreet inquiries were made. Carefully worded questions posed to those who might have knowledge of the Duke's recent activities and his interest in the Northern Territories. Slowly, painstakingly, a clearer picture of the Duke's conspiracy began to emerge. His primary advisor in this endeavor appeared to be Lord Valerius, a cunning and ambitious nobleman known for his ruthlessness and his fascination with arcane knowledge. Valerius had been seen spending considerable time poring over ancient maps and texts in the ducal library, and rumors circulated of secret meetings held late into the night in the Duke's private chambers. It seemed that Valerius had convinced the Duke that the Shadowfen held a source of immense power, a power that could be harnessed and controlled if the ancient pact were manipulated during the celestial alignment. The wooden box, with its archaic script detailing the terms of the pact, was likely seen as the key to unlocking this power. The Duke's plan, as they pieced it together, was audacious and terrifyingly reckless. He intended to send a contingent of his most trusted guards, led by Lord Valerius, to the Heartwood Tree in the Shadowfen during the Great Conjunction. Their goal was to disrupt the traditional rituals, to seize control of the Heartwood, and to attempt to bend the power of the Fawn Walker to the Duke's will. The scribe had also mentioned the construction of some kind of device, the purpose of which remained unclear. Alexander feared it might be intended to amplify or control the ancient power, a dangerous tool in the hands of those who did not understand its true nature. The approaching celestial alignment was now more than just a significant time for the pact. It was a deadline for the Duke's potentially catastrophic plan. They had little time left to act. "We have to warn the Fenlanders," Eleanor said, her voice filled with urgency. "They need to know what the Duke intends to do." Alexander nodded grimly. "And we need to find a way to stop him. He is playing with forces he cannot comprehend, and the consequences could be devastating." Their quiet pursuit of knowledge had transformed into a desperate race against time, a battle against a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power within the duchy. The whispers of darkness had coalesced into a tangible storm, and the silent oath they shared now compelled them to act, to become protectors of an ancient balance against the Duke's reckless ambition. The gentle night on the citadel felt like a distant memory, replaced by the stark reality of a gathering storm that threatened to engulf them all. Chapter 11. The Smuggler's Trail, a Desperate Plea. The hidden networks that exist beneath the surface of seemingly ordered societies, the clandestine routes and the individuals who navigate them, often operating outside the reach of officialdom. Imagine the desperation that drives one to seek the help of such individuals, to entrust vital information to those who dwell in the shadows. Observe the delicate dance of trust and risk involved in such an exchange, the hope that a path to salvation might lie in the most unexpected corners. This is the precarious alliance Alexander and Eleanor now seek, the urgency of the approaching celestial alignment forcing them to consider unconventional and potentially dangerous avenues. The chilling knowledge of the Duke's impending assault on the Shadowfen and the rapidly approaching celestial alignment left Alexander and Eleanor with a stark realization. They could not confront the Duke directly without irrefutable proof of his intentions, proof that they did not possess. Their attempts to gather information within the court had already drawn unwanted attention, and any overt accusation would likely be met with denial and swift reprisal. They needed a different approach, a way to reach the Fenlanders and warn them of the impending danger. Alexander recalled fragmented tales from his research in the archives, whispers of secret trails and individuals who traversed the treacherous terrain between the settled parts of the duchy and the more isolated regions, including the fringes of the Shadowfen. These were smugglers, outcasts, and those who preferred to remain outside the Duke's direct authority, but they possessed an intimate knowledge of the land and its hidden pathways. Desperate times, Alexander reasoned, called for desperate measures. They began to discreetly inquire about these clandestine networks, seeking individuals who might be willing to undertake a perilous journey into the Shadowfen. Their search led them to the less reputable taverns and back alleys of Ethelberg, places where secrets were traded in hushed tones and trust was a rare commodity. It was in a dimly lit tavern, its air thick with the smell of stale ale and pipe smoke, that they finally found a lead. A wizened old man with a network of informants throughout the city spoke of a woman known as Lyra, a smuggler with a reputation for navigating the treacherous paths leading to the northern territories. Lyra was said to be fiercely independent and wary of the Duke's authority, making her a potential, albeit risky, ally. Finding Lyra proved to be another challenge. She operated in the shadows, her whereabouts known only to a select few. After several days of cautious inquiries and coded messages passed through intermediaries, they finally arranged a clandestine meeting in a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The warehouse was a cavernous space filled with the dust and decay of forgotten goods. Lyra emerged from the darkness like a phantom, her features sharp and intelligent, her movements agile and wary. She was cloaked and carried herself with an air of self-reliance that spoke of a life lived on the fringes. Alexander, speaking with a quiet urgency, explained their predicament, carefully omitting any direct mention of the wooden box or the specifics of the ancient pact. He spoke of rumors of the Duke's impending actions in the Shadowfen and the potential danger it posed to the inhabitants of the region. He appealed to Lyra's sense of justice and her independence from the Duke's rule, offering a substantial sum of coin for her assistance in reaching the Fenlanders with a warning. Lyra listened intently, her keen eyes assessing their sincerity. She was a woman who had learned to survive by trusting her instincts and reading the intentions of others. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice low and measured. "The Shadowfen is not a place for outsiders," she said, her gaze unwavering. "The Fenlanders are a secretive people, wary of those from the south. And the Duke? His interest in the north has been growing. To travel there openly would be to invite trouble." "We understand the risks," Eleanor interjected, her voice filled with earnestness. "But the danger to the Fenlanders may be great. We have reason to believe that the Duke intends to disrupt something ancient and powerful." Lyra's expression softened slightly. There was a hint of understanding in her eyes, a recognition of the urgency in their plea. "There are paths," she conceded, "hidden trails known only to a few. I can guide someone to the edge of the fun, to those who might listen. But it will be a perilous journey, and I will not risk my own neck for mere coin. What is truly at stake here?" Alexander, realizing that mere payment was not enough, decided to reveal a carefully guarded piece of information. "We possess something," he said, his voice low, "something that speaks of the ancient agreements between your people and the land. Something the Duke desires." Lyra's eyes narrowed, her interest piqued. "Something the Duke desires. That is a dangerous possession indeed. Show me." Eleanor carefully produced a sketch of one of the more prominent symbols from the wooden box, the stylized intertwining of the Fenland serpent and a water lily. Lyra's reaction was immediate. A flicker of recognition, almost reverence, crossed her face. "The old mark," she murmured, her voice hushed. "You have seen the old mark. Then you speak the truth. The Duke's interest in the fun is not benign." A fragile alliance was forged in the dusty confines of the deserted warehouse. Lyra agreed to guide one of them, Alexander, with his knowledge of the archaic script and his scholarly demeanor, along a secret route into the Shadowfen. Eleanor would remain in Ethelberg, maintaining a semblance of normalcy and gathering any further information about the Duke's plans. It was a risky separation, but a necessary one. As Alexander prepared for the perilous journey into the unknown depths of the Shadowfen, guided by a wary smuggler, Eleanor felt a heavy weight of responsibility settle upon her. Their desperate plea had found an unlikely answer in the shadows of Ethelberg, but the true test lay ahead, in the treacherous paths and the ancient secrets that awaited them. The whispers of darkness had led them to a fragile hope, a desperate gamble on the knowledge held within a wooden box and the wisdom of a secluded people. The silent oath they shared now stretched across the miles, a bond of love and a shared commitment to a perilous cause. Chapter 12. Into the Mire, the Secrets of the Shadowfen. The primal allure of the untamed wilderness, the mysteries that lie hidden within landscapes untouched by civilization. Imagine venturing into such a realm, where the natural world holds both breathtaking beauty and unseen dangers, and where ancient traditions hold sway. Observe the cautious steps taken into the unknown, the reliance on a guide who understands the subtle language of the land. This is the journey Alexander now undertakes, guided by Lyra into the heart of the Shadowfen, a land steeped in ancient lore and whispered secrets. The air changed the moment Alexander and Lyra left the familiar paths and ventured into the fringes of the Shadowfen. The well-trodden tracks gave way to spongy earth, the scent of pine and wood smoke replaced by the damp, earthy aroma of decaying vegetation and stagnant water. A thick mist, clinging low to the ground, swirled around them, obscuring the path ahead and lending an eerie silence to the landscape. Lyra moved with a fluid grace, her boots making barely a sound on the yielding ground. She possessed an innate understanding of the fun, her senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the terrain, the rustling of unseen creatures, the telltale signs of hidden dangers. Alexander followed closely, his scholarly mind attempting to absorb the unique ecosystem, but his primary focus remained on Lyra and the path she navigated with such confidence. The deeper they ventured, the more otherworldly the Shadowfen became. Twisted trees, their branches draped with moss like spectral beards, rose from the murky waters. Strange, luminous fungi pulsed with a soft light in the dimness, casting an ethereal glow on the landscape. The silence was broken only by the croaking of unseen frogs, the buzzing of insects, and the occasional mournful cry of a water bird. Lyra led Alexander along a series of narrow, winding paths, often no more than barely submerged logs or patches of firmer ground hidden beneath the deceptive mire. She pointed out subtle markers, a uniquely shaped tree, a cluster of unusual reeds, that guided their way through the seemingly trackless wilderness. As they traveled, Lyra spoke of the Fenlanders, her voice hushed with a mixture of respect and caution. She described them as a reclusive people, deeply connected to the land and fiercely protective of their traditions. They lived in small, isolated communities scattered throughout the Fun, their lives governed by the ancient pact and the cycles of the celestial alignment. They are not quick to trust outsiders, Lyra warned. They have their own ways, their own laws. We must approach them with respect and humility. She also spoke of the Fawn Walker, the guardian spirit of the Fawn, her voice taking on a reverent tone. She described it as a powerful entity, its presence felt in the shifting mists and the deep stillness of the water. The Fenlanders believed the spirit ensured the bounty of the land and protected them from harm, as long as the terms of the ancient pact were upheld. Alexander, recalling the hermit's words about the interconnectedness of the pacts, felt a growing sense of the delicate balance that the Duke's ambition threatened to disrupt. After several days of arduous travel through the mire, Lyra finally led Alexander to a hidden clearing, a small island of relatively dry land surrounded by the murky waters. A cluster of simple dwellings, built from reeds and timber, stood nestled amongst the trees. This was one of the Fenlander communities. As they approached, figures emerged cautiously from the dwellings, their eyes wary and their expressions guarded. They were clad in simple garments woven from natural fibers, their faces bearing the marks of a life lived in close proximity to the elements. Lyra spoke to them in a low, melodic tongue that Alexander did not understand. The Fenlanders listened intently, their gazes shifting between Lyra and the unfamiliar figure of Alexander. After a long exchange, one of the elders, a woman with wise eyes and a network of wrinkles etched around her mouth, stepped forward. Lyra turned to Alexander. "She will listen to what you have to say. But you must speak with respect and honesty. They will know if you try to deceive them." Alexander, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation, addressed the Fenlanders through Lyra's translation. He spoke of the rumors he had heard in Ethelberg, of the Duke's growing interest in their land and the approaching celestial alignment. He carefully explained his concern that the Duke might intend to disrupt their ancient traditions and exploit the power of the Fawn Walker for his own gain. As he spoke, he showed them the sketches he had made of the archaic script from the wooden box, and Lyra translated the fragmented phrases he had deciphered. The Fenlanders listened intently, their expressions shifting from suspicion to a growing unease. When Alexander mentioned the Heartwood and the Song of Appeasement, a murmur rippled through the gathered Fenlanders. The elder woman stepped forward again, her eyes now filled with a deep concern. Through Lyra's translation, she spoke of the Heartwood tree, a sacred place deep within the Fawn, and the ancient song that was sung during the celestial alignment to honor the Fawn Walker and reaffirm the pact. She confirmed that the celestial alignment was fast approaching, a time of great significance for their community. Alexander then described the man in the Duke's livery and the cloaked figures, the evidence of the Duke's clandestine interest in the wooden box and their research. The Fenlanders exchanged worried glances. It became clear that they were not unaware of the increased presence of outsiders near their borders. The elder woman spoke again, her voice grave. "The Duke's interest is a shadow that falls upon our land. We have felt its chill. Tell us what you know of his intentions." Alexander, with Lyra's help, laid bare the information they had gleaned, the scribes' overheard conversation, the rumors of Lord Valerius's involvement, the implication that the Duke sought to control the power of the Fawn Walker for his own selfish purposes. The Fenlanders listened in stunned silence. The ancient pact that had sustained their community for generations was now under threat from a power-hungry ruler who did not understand the delicate balance they maintained. The secrets of the Shadowfen, long guarded and revered, were now at risk of being exploited, with potentially devastating consequences. The journey into the mire had revealed not only the hidden world of the Fenlanders but also the grave danger that loomed over them, a danger that Alexander and Eleanor had unwittingly stumbled upon. The silent oath to seek the truth now carried the weight of a responsibility to protect an entire community and the ancient power that sustained their way of life. Chapter 13. The Fenlanders' Plea, a Pact Under Threat. The deep-rooted connection between a people and their land, a bond forged over generations through shared traditions and a profound respect for the natural world. Imagine the fear and desperation that arises when this connection is threatened by external forces, by those who seek to exploit the sacred for personal gain. Observe the quiet resolve of a community facing such a crisis, their willingness to defend their way of life and the ancient agreements that sustain them. This is the spirit that Alexander now witnesses among the Fenlanders, their plea for help echoing the urgency of the approaching celestial alignment. A heavy silence descended upon the Fenlander clearing as Alexander finished recounting the information they had gathered about the Duke's intentions. The faces of the community members, initially guarded and wary, now reflected a deep concern, a palpable fear for the future of their ancient way of life. The elder woman, her wise eyes filled with a sorrowful understanding, finally broke the silence. Through Lyra's translation, she spoke of the Great Conjunction, the approaching celestial alignment, as a time of profound spiritual significance for the Fenlanders. It was a period when the veil between their world and the realm of the Fawn Walker thinned, a time for renewal, for reaffirming the ancient pact through the sacred song and the offering at the Heartwood tree. To disrupt this ritual would be to sever their connection to the guardian spirit, to invite imbalance and potential catastrophe upon their land and their people. "The Duke does not understand what he seeks to control," the elder woman said, her voice resonating with a quiet power. "The Fawn Walker is not a force to be trifled with. The pact is not a tool to be wielded for personal gain. It is a bond of respect, a balance that has sustained us for generations." She explained that the resources the Duke's advisor had spoken of were not mere material wealth. They were the very essence of the Fawn, the life-giving waters, the fertile earth, the spiritual energy that permeated the land, all sustained by the Fawn Walker's favor in exchange for their adherence to the ancient oath. To exploit these resources, without understanding the delicate reciprocity of the pact, would be to invite ruin. The Fenlanders spoke amongst themselves in hushed tones, their voices filled with a mixture of fear and a growing resolve. They looked to the elder woman for guidance, their faces reflecting a deep trust in her wisdom. Finally, the elder woman turned back to Alexander and Lyra, her expression grave. "You have brought us a grave warning, strangers. You have shown us that the shadow of the Duke reaches even into our hidden land. We are a peaceful people, but we will defend our traditions and our connection to the Fawn Walker." She explained that they had long suspected an increased interest from the outside world, noting the more frequent sightings of unfamiliar figures near their borders. They had felt a subtle stirring in the land, a disquiet that mirrored their own growing unease about the approaching celestial alignment. "The wooden box you possess," the elder woman continued, her gaze fixed on Alexander. "It contains the words of our ancestors, the very essence of the pact. The Duke seeks to control it, to twist its power for his own ends. We must protect it." A sense of shared purpose filled the clearing. The Fenlanders, initially wary of Alexander and Lyra, now saw them as allies, messengers who had brought a crucial warning. The urgency of the approaching celestial alignment hung heavy in the air. Time was running out. The elder woman outlined a plan. They would need to reach the Heartwood tree before the Duke's forces arrived. The tree was located deep within the most treacherous part of the Fawn, a place few outsiders dared to venture. The Fenlanders knew the hidden paths, the safe passages through the mire. They would guide Alexander to the Heartwood, where he could witness the sacred ritual and perhaps find a way to protect it from the Duke's interference. Lyra, her initial wariness replaced by a fierce determination to help, offered her knowledge of the waterways and secret trails. She knew shortcuts through the Fawn that even some of the Fenlanders rarely used. Eleanor, though far away in Ethelberg, remained a vital part of their plan. They needed a way to communicate with her, to inform her of the situation and to coordinate any potential actions within the citadel. Lyra knew of a network of discreet messengers who could travel between the Shadowfen and Ethelberg, carrying coded messages. As the Fenlanders prepared for the journey to the Heartwood, a sense of quiet resolve settled over the community. They were not warriors, but they were deeply connected to their land and their traditions. They would face the Duke's threat with courage and determination, guided by their ancient wisdom and the silent strength of their pact with the Fawn Walker. Alexander felt a profound sense of responsibility. He had come to the Shadowfen seeking knowledge, but he had found himself drawn into a conflict that threatened the very heart of this hidden world. The whispers of darkness that had begun in Ethelberg had led him to a people whose way of life was now under siege. The silent oath he shared with Eleanor now extended to these strangers, a commitment to protect their ancient pact and the delicate balance of their world. The crossroads of choice had led them down a perilous path, but it was a path they now walked with a newfound purpose, side by side with the guardians of the Shadowfen. The plea of a people under threat echoed the urgency of the gathering storm, and the time for action was upon them. Chapter 14. The Heartwood beckons, a race against time. The sacred places that exist within the natural world, locations imbued with a sense of ancient power and spiritual significance. Imagine a journey to such a place, a destination shrouded in mystery and revered by those who understand its true nature. Observe the urgency of a race against time, the need to reach a critical point before a looming threat can unleash its destructive potential. This is the perilous journey Alexander now undertakes, guided by the Fenlanders deeper into the treacherous heart of the Shadowfen, the Heartwood tree their destination in a desperate bid to protect the ancient pact. The Fenlanders moved with a quiet urgency, their bare feet and simple footwear navigating the treacherous terrain of the Shadowfen with an innate familiarity. Guided by the elder woman and a handful of strong, silent men, Alexander followed closely, his boots sinking into the spongy earth, the air thick with the cloying scent of the mire. Lyra, ever watchful, scouted ahead, her knowledge of the hidden waterways proving invaluable as they traversed submerged paths and narrow causeways. The deeper they ventured, the more potent the atmosphere of the Shadowfen became. The twisted trees seemed to watch them with ancient eyes, the luminous fungi pulsed with a more intense light, and the silence held a palpable sense of waiting, as if the very land held its breath in anticipation of the approaching celestial alignment. The elder woman explained that the Heartwood tree lay at the heart of the Faun, a place where the spiritual energy of the land converged. It was an ancient tree, its roots said to reach deep into the underworld, its branches stretching towards the heavens, a living conduit between the Fenlanders and the Faun Walker. The Song of Appeasement was sung at its base during the Great Conjunction, a melodic reaffirmation of the pact, an offering of respect and gratitude. Time was their enemy. Lyra's network of messengers had been dispatched to Ethelberg to inform Eleanor of the Duke's impending actions and their journey to the Heartwood. They hoped Eleanor could gather further intelligence or find a way to delay the Duke's forces. As they pressed onward, they began to notice subtle signs of intrusion. Broken branches, disturbed patches of mud, and the faint scent of metal in the air hinted that others had recently passed this way. The Duke's men, led by Lord Valerius, were likely already making their way towards the Heartwood. The urgency intensified. The Fenlanders quickened their pace, their silent determination a powerful force. Alexander, despite his lack of familiarity with the terrain, pushed himself to keep up, driven by the weight of the responsibility he now carried. After what felt like an eternity of navigating the labyrinthine waterways and tangled woods, they finally reached their destination. The Heartwood tree stood in a small clearing bathed in an ethereal light that seemed to emanate from the tree itself. It was a colossal being, its trunk wider than any Alexander had ever seen, its ancient bark covered in intricate patterns that resembled the archaic script. Its branches, reaching skyward like gnarled fingers, were adorned with luminous moss that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow. The air around the tree thrummed with a subtle energy, a palpable sense of ancient power. But the clearing was not empty. A contingent of heavily armed men, bearing the Duke's livery, were already there, their presence a stark violation of the sacred space. Lord Valerius, clad in dark armor, stood at the base of the Heartwood, a strange metallic device resting on a tripod beside him. His face held an expression of avarice and a disturbing anticipation. The Fenlanders reacted instantly, their quiet demeanor replaced by a fierce protectiveness of their sacred place. They moved forward, their simple tools and bare hands their only weapons against the Duke's armed guards. "Stop!" Alexander cried out, stepping forward. "You do not understand what you are doing. This is a sacred place, protected by an ancient power." Lord Valerius turned, his eyes cold and dismissive. "The ramblings of primitives and superstitious scholars. Stand aside, stranger. The Duke seeks to harness the power that lies dormant here, a power that will bring prosperity to our duchy." He gestured to his men, who began to advance on the Fenlanders. A tense standoff ensued, the silent power of the heartwood tree a silent witness to the impending conflict. The elder woman stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority. "This is our sacred ground. You will not defile it." Valerius scoffed. "Defile? We are claiming what is rightfully ours. This land and its power belong to the Duke." As the Duke's men moved to subdue the Fenlanders, Alexander knew they were outmatched. He looked at the heartwood tree, its ancient presence radiating a profound sense of power. He remembered the hermit's words, the interconnectedness of the pacts, the song of binding. An idea, desperate but potentially their only hope, sparked in his mind. He turned to the elder woman. "The song," he said urgently. "The song of appeasement. We must sing it now, before they can disrupt the connection." The elder woman understood. A look of grim determination crossed her face. She raised her voice, and a low, resonant melody began to fill the clearing, the ancient song of the Shadowfen, a plea to their guardian spirit. The other Fenlanders joined in, their voices rising in unison, a powerful wave of sound that echoed through the silent fun. As the song filled the air, the luminous moss on the heartwood tree began to glow more intensely, its light pulsing in rhythm with the melody. A subtle energy crackled in the air, a tangible manifestation of the ancient power that Valerius sought to control. The race against time had reached its climax, the fate of the Shadowfen and perhaps the entire duchy hanging in the balance, dependent on the power of an ancient song and the courage of those who sought to protect its sacred harmony. Chapter 15. Echoes of the Guardian, a power unleashed. The raw, untamed power of the natural world, the forces that lie dormant beneath the surface, waiting to be awakened. Imagine the consequences of disrupting an ancient harmony, of attempting to control energies beyond human comprehension. Observe the unleashing of such power, the way it can manifest in unexpected and awe-inspiring ways. This is the spectacle that now unfolds in the heartwood clearing, the Fenlanders' ancient song resonating with a force that even Lord Valerius cannot ignore. As the Fenlanders' ancient song filled the clearing, a palpable shift occurred in the atmosphere. The air thrummed with an increasing intensity, and the light emanating from the heartwood tree pulsed with a vibrant, almost blinding glow. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the ground, rising up through Alexander's boots and resonating deep within his chest. Even the Duke's guards, their initial aggression momentarily forgotten, paused in their advance, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion and unease. Lord Valerius, however, remained defiant, his eyes fixed on the heartwood tree with a greedy intensity. "Foolish primitives," he scoffed, his voice barely audible above the rising melody. "Do you think your simple chanting can deter progress?" He gestured sharply towards his men. "Seize the tree. Secure the device." But as his guards moved forward once more, the very air around the heartwood clearing began to shimmer and distort. The mist that clung to the edges of the fawn thickened, swirling inwards with an unnatural speed. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, not the calls of birds or the croaking of frogs, but something deeper, more resonant, like the sigh of a colossal being awakening from a long slumber. The metallic device beside Valerius began to hum in response to the escalating energy, its intricate gears whirring, its surface glowing with an eerie light. He watched it with a triumphant grin, believing it was amplifying the power of the heartwood, bending it to his will. He could not have been more wrong. The Fenlander song reached a crescendo, their voices rising in a unified chorus, a powerful invocation that seemed to resonate with the very essence of the Shadowfen. The light from the heartwood intensified further, bathing the clearing in an otherworldly radiance. And then the Fawn Walker answered. It did not manifest in a physical form that Alexander could readily comprehend. Instead, it was a presence, a feeling that washed over the clearing like a tidal wave of raw power. The air crackled with energy, the ground beneath their feet vibrated violently, and the surrounding flora seemed to pulse with an unnatural life. The mist swirled and coalesced into fleeting shapes, serpentine forms, luminous eyes, and the delicate petals of giant water lilies, all hinting at the nature of the ancient guardian. The Duke's guards recoiled in terror, their bravado dissolving in the face of this overwhelming display of power. Some stumbled backward, their weapons clattering to the ground, their faces pale with fear. Even Lord Valerius took a step back, his triumphant grin replaced by a look of bewildered apprehension. His metallic device sputtered and sparked, its humming turning into a frantic, uncontrolled whine. The Fawn Walker's presence seemed to focus on the heartwood tree, the ancient melody acting as a conduit for its power. The tree itself began to sway gently, its luminous moss shedding a shower of glowing particles that danced in the air like 1,000 fireflies. A wave of pure energy emanated from the tree, washing over the clearing. The Fenlanders seemed to draw strength from this energy, their voices growing stronger, their connection to their guardian reaffirmed. But the effect on the Duke's men was devastating. They cried out in fear as the energy struck them, some collapsing to the ground as if struck by an invisible force, others fleeing into the mist-shrouded depths of the Fawn. Their greed and ambition turned to sheer panic. Lord Valerius stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief as his metallic device began to glow intensely. Then with a violent surge of energy, it exploded, throwing him backward. He lay on the ground, stunned and disoriented, the scent of ozone filling the air. As the Fawn Walker's power subsided, the intense light from the heartwood softened, the humming in the ground faded, and the swirling mists gradually calmed. The clearing was left in an eerie silence, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. The Duke's forces were routed, their attempt to control the ancient power of the Shadowfen ending in chaos and terror. The Fenlanders, their connection to their guardian reaffirmed, stood tall, their ancient song a testament to the enduring strength of their pact. Alexander watched in awe, humbled by the display of power he had witnessed. The hermit's warnings had been true. The forces at play in the Shadowfen were ancient and potent, not to be trifled with. The elder woman approached Alexander, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You brought us warning, stranger. You helped us protect our sacred place. The Fawn Walker has answered our call." Lyra emerged from the edge of the mist, her face pale but her eyes filled with a newfound respect for the Fenlanders and their guardian. "I have never seen anything like it," she whispered, her voice awestruck. The immediate threat was over, but Alexander knew that the Duke's ambition would likely not be so easily quelled. They had won a battle, but the war for the Shadowfen's future was far from over. And somewhere in Ethelberg, Eleanor waited, unaware of the incredible events that had unfolded in the heart of the mire. The echoes of the Guardian's power resonated through the Shadowfen, a potent reminder of the ancient forces at play, and the silent oath to protect this hidden world now carried an even greater significance. Chapter 16. Whispers of Retribution, the Duke's Fury. The corrosive nature of wounded pride and thwarted ambition, the way a public defeat can fester into a burning desire for revenge. Imagine a ruler accustomed to absolute authority facing humiliation and the loss of face. Observe the subtle shifts in the political landscape as a consequence, the tightening grip of power and the increased suspicion directed towards those perceived as responsible. This is the volatile atmosphere that now descends upon Ethelberg, the news of Lord Valerius's disastrous expedition reaching the Duke's ears. The journey back to the edge of the Shadowfen with Lyra and a small escort of Fenlanders was swift but filled with a heavy anticipation. Alexander knew that the news of Lord Valerius's failure would reach the Duke in Ethelberg, and he could only imagine the ruler's reaction. The display of the Fawn Walker's power had been undeniable, a stark rebuttal to the Duke's arrogance, and Alexander feared it would only fuel his desire for retribution. Lyra's messengers had already been dispatched, carrying a coded account of the events at the Heartwood Tree to Eleanor. Alexander could only hope that she had received the warning and was taking precautions. The thought of her safety weighed heavily on his mind. Upon reaching a relatively safe point on the fawn's edge, Alexander bid farewell to Lyra and the Fenlanders, promising to find a way to maintain contact and to stand with them against any further aggression from the Duke. He knew he needed to return to Ethelberg, to understand the fallout from the failed expedition and to protect Eleanor. The journey back to the citadel was tense. The roads seemed more heavily patrolled, and the atmosphere in the towns and villages they passed through felt strained, as if an unspoken fear hung in the air. Alexander kept a low profile, relying on his scholarly guise to avoid undue attention. Upon his arrival in Ethelberg, the change in the citadel was palpable. The usual murmur of courtly life had been replaced by hushed whispers and furtive glances. The Duke's guards were more numerous and their demeanor more severe. A palpable tension hung in the air, thick with unspoken fear and speculation. Alexander made his way cautiously to their chambers, his heart pounding with apprehension. He found Eleanor waiting, her face pale but resolute. She embraced him tightly, relief evident in her eyes. "The messengers arrived," she whispered. "Lyra's account. It was incredible. The power you witnessed." Alexander nodded, his mind still reeling from the events at the Heartwood. The Duke's ambition was met with a force he could not comprehend. Valerius. I do not know his fate, but the Duke's men were routed. However, their relief was short-lived. Eleanor informed Alexander that the Duke's fury upon hearing the news had been terrifying. Lord Valerius had returned, injured and humiliated, his account of the events dismissed as the ravings of a madman. The Duke, refusing to believe in the power of the Fawn Walker, instead blamed Alexander and the Fenlanders for Valerius's failure. "He believes you conspired with them," Eleanor explained, her voice low with worry. "He sees you as a traitor, undermining his authority and thwarting his plans. The citadel is filled with his guards, searching for any sign of your involvement." Their chambers were no longer a sanctuary. They were under suspicion, their every move likely being watched. The Duke's wrath had descended upon them, and they were now in grave danger. "We need to be careful," Alexander said, his mind racing. "The Duke will not act openly yet. He needs to understand the extent of our knowledge and our connections to the Shadowfen. He will be watching, waiting for us to make a mistake." They discussed their options, their conversation hushed and urgent. Remaining in Ethelberg felt like walking into a trap. The Duke's paranoia and his desire for revenge would make their lives increasingly precarious. "We need to leave," Eleanor said, her gaze determined. "We need to get away from the citadel, away from his reach." Alexander agreed. They had warned the Fenlanders, and the guardian spirit had shown its power. Their primary concern now was their own survival and the protection of the knowledge they possessed. The wooden box, a catalyst for so much turmoil, remained their responsibility. They decided to seek refuge outside the duchy, at least until the Duke's fury subsided. Alexander had contacts among scholarly circles in neighboring territories who might offer them sanctuary. The journey would be dangerous, but staying in Ethelberg was no longer a viable option. Under the cover of darkness, they made their preparations, gathering essential supplies and disguising themselves to avoid detection. The silent oath they had made to each other now included a desperate pact for survival. As they slipped out of the citadel under the cloak of night, the whispers of retribution seemed to follow them, carried on the wind. The Duke's fury was a storm gathering on the horizon, and they knew that they were now fugitives, their lives irrevocably changed by the secrets of the Shadowfen and the power they had witnessed. Their journey into the unknown was far from over. It had merely taken a more perilous turn. Chapter 17. The Scholar's Sanctuary, a Haven of Secrets. The enduring bonds of intellectual kinship, the way shared passions and a thirst for knowledge can create unexpected havens in a hostile world. Imagine seeking refuge among those who value wisdom and understanding above political machinations. Observe the cautious exchange of information, the gradual building of trust among individuals united by a common pursuit. This is the sanctuary Alexander and Eleanor now seek, the promise of refuge lying within the walls of a remote scholarly community. Their escape from Ethelberg under the cloak of night was fraught with a nervous tension. Every shadow seemed to hold the gaze of the Duke's guards, every unfamiliar sound sent a jolt of fear through them. They relied on their disguises and their knowledge of the city's less-traveled paths to evade detection, their hearts pounding with each step towards the city gates. Once beyond the walls, they kept to the less frequented roads, traveling under the guise of traveling scholars. Alexander's knowledge of ancient languages and Eleanor's artistic skills provided them with a plausible cover story. They journeyed eastward, towards the neighboring territory of Eldoria, where Alexander had maintained correspondence with a secluded community of scholars nestled in the foothills of the Azure Mountains. This community, known as the Collegium Sapientiae, or the College of Wisdom, was renowned for its dedication to the study of ancient history, forgotten languages, and esoteric knowledge. Alexander had visited them years ago during his own scholarly pursuits and had forged a bond of mutual respect with its leading members, particularly the elderly and enigmatic librarian, Master Elias. He hoped that the Collegium, valuing knowledge above political allegiances, would offer them sanctuary. The journey was long and arduous, but the prospect of a safe haven spurred them onward. They avoided major settlements, relying on their wits and the kindness of strangers they encountered along the way. Eleanor's sketches often earned them food and shelter, her artistic talent a welcome respite in the often harsh realities of their flight. Finally, after weeks of travel, the majestic peaks of the Azure Mountains rose before them, their snow-capped summits piercing the clear sky. Nestled in a secluded valley, surrounded by ancient forests and guarded by natural cliffs, lay the Collegium Sapientiae. Its stone walls and towering library seemed to exude an aura of quiet contemplation and intellectual pursuit. They approached cautiously, announcing themselves as visiting scholars seeking the wisdom of Master Elias. After a period of careful scrutiny by the Collegium's gatekeepers, they were granted entry. The atmosphere within the Collegium was a stark contrast to the tense and politically charged air of Ethelberg. Here, the focus was on study, debate, and the pursuit of knowledge. Scholars moved through the halls with their heads buried in books, and the air hummed with the quiet murmur of intellectual discourse. Master Elias, a man whose eyes held the depth of countless volumes and whose voice was a gentle whisper, greeted Alexander with a warm embrace. He listened intently as Alexander recounted their tale, the discovery of the wooden box, their journey to the Shadowfen, the power they had witnessed, and their subsequent flight from the Duke's wrath. Master Elias's expression remained calm throughout Alexander's narrative, his gaze thoughtful. When Alexander showed him the sketches of the archaic script and the serpent and bloom symbol, a flicker of recognition crossed his ancient eyes. "The language of the Fenlanders," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "And the ancient symbol. It speaks of connections that stretch back further than even our oldest texts record." He explained that the Collegium possessed a small collection of obscure texts that hinted at the ancient pacts between the peoples of the region and the spiritual guardians of their lands. He had long suspected that these were not mere superstitions but remnants of a deeper understanding of the world. Master Elias offered Alexander and Eleanor sanctuary within the Collegium, assuring them that their pursuit of knowledge and their respect for ancient traditions would be honored there. He provided them with comfortable chambers and access to the Collegium's extensive library, encouraging Alexander to continue his research into the wooden box and the history of the Shadowfen. In the quiet solitude of the Collegium's library, surrounded by countless volumes of forgotten lore, Alexander felt a sense of peace he had not experienced since their discovery of the box. He immersed himself in the ancient texts, seeking further clues about the nature of the Fawn Walker, the specifics of the pact, and any historical precedents for the Duke's ambition. Eleanor, too, found solace within the Collegium's walls. She spent hours in the scriptorium, meticulously copying ancient manuscripts and creating detailed sketches of the symbols from the wooden box. The Collegium scholars, intrigued by her talent and her quiet intelligence, welcomed her into their community. Days turned into weeks, and a sense of normalcy began to return to their lives. They found themselves surrounded by individuals who shared their passion for knowledge and who offered them a safe haven from the dangers that pursued them. The Collegium Sapientiae became more than just a refuge. It became a place of healing and intellectual renewal. However, the whispers of the outside world could not be entirely silenced. Messengers occasionally arrived at the Collegium, bringing news from the duchy. The reports spoke of the Duke's increasing paranoia and his relentless search for Alexander and Eleanor. His fury had not abated, and his obsession with the Shadowfen seemed to have only intensified. Alexander and Eleanor knew that their sanctuary, however welcoming, might not be permanent. The Duke's reach was long, and the secrets they carried were too significant to remain hidden forever. The Scholar's Sanctuary offered them a respite, a chance to gather their strength and deepen their understanding, but they knew that their journey was far from over. The echoes of the Duke's fury were a constant reminder of the dangers that awaited them beyond the Collegium's walls. Their silent oath to protect the secrets of the Shadowfen and to ensure their own survival now included a new element: the need to discern their next move, to decide when and how to re-enter the dangerous game they had been forced to play. Chapter 18. The Librarian's Lore, Unveiling Ancient Connections. The vastness of accumulated knowledge held within the walls of ancient libraries, the interconnectedness of seemingly disparate histories and traditions. Imagine a dedicated scholar, a guardian of these forgotten narratives, patiently piecing together fragments of the past to illuminate the present. Observe the gradual unveiling of long-lost connections, the realization that seemingly isolated events are part of a larger, more intricate tapestry. This is the intellectual journey Alexander now undertakes within the Collegium Sapientiae, guided by the wisdom of Master Elias. Within the hallowed halls of the Collegium's library, surrounded by the silent wisdom of centuries, Alexander found himself drawn deeper into the mysteries of the Shadowfen and its ancient pact. Master Elias, recognizing Alexander's genuine thirst for knowledge and the gravity of their situation, took a personal interest in guiding his research. The Collegium's collection, while focused primarily on the histories and languages of Eldoria and its surrounding territories, held a surprisingly rich vein of obscure texts referencing the lands to the west, including fragmented accounts of the duchy and its more isolated regions. Master Elias, with his encyclopedic knowledge of the library's holdings, directed Alexander towards these forgotten volumes. Together, they pored over brittle manuscripts and faded scrolls, their fingers tracing ancient scripts that spoke of forgotten kingdoms and long-lost traditions. Master Elias shared his own insights, drawing connections between the symbols and linguistic patterns found in the Shadowfen's archaic language and those documented in other ancient cultures. He spoke of a time when the lands now divided by political boundaries were part of a larger cultural sphere, sharing common beliefs and spiritual practices. He showed Alexander a series of intricate carvings on an Eldorian artifact, depicting a serpent entwined with a flowering vine that bore a striking resemblance to the Fenland symbol, albeit with subtle variations in the style of the serpent and the type of flower. The accompanying inscription, in a dialect long extinct, spoke of a guardian of the wetlands and a bond of reciprocity with the people who dwelled there. Master Elias explained that similar symbols and narratives could be found in other ancient artifacts and texts within the Collegium's collection, each adapted to the specific landscape and the perceived nature of the local guardian spirit. The mountain people Serpent and Bloom, the Fenlander serpent and water lily, and this Eldorian serpent and vine all seem to be regional variations of a shared, ancient understanding of the spiritual forces that shaped their world. He theorized that these pacts were not isolated agreements but rather part of a larger network of interconnected relationships between the early inhabitants of the region and the powerful entities they believed resided within the land. These relationships, he suggested, were based on a principle of balance and mutual respect, a recognition that the well-being of the human communities was intrinsically linked to the health and favor of the natural world and its spiritual guardians. As Alexander shared his decipherment of the archaic script from the wooden box, Master Elias offered further interpretations, drawing upon his knowledge of related ancient languages. He helped Alexander understand the nuances of the phrasing, the subtle allusions to the nature of the Fawn Walker and the specific terms of the Fenlander's oath. The Heartwood, they concluded, was not merely a tree but a focal point of spiritual energy, a place where the connection between the human and spiritual realms was particularly strong. The Song of Appeasement was not just a melody but a carefully constructed invocation, its rhythm and lyrics designed to resonate with the Fawn Walker and reaffirm the ancient bond. Master Elias also shared a chilling passage from a particularly obscure text, a warning about the consequences of disrupting these ancient pacts. It spoke of imbalance, of the land turning barren, of storms and pestilence, and of the wrath of the guardians being unleashed upon those who sought to exploit their power for selfish gain. The parallels to the Duke's ambition were disturbingly clear. Through his conversations with Master Elias, Alexander began to see the events unfolding not as an isolated conflict in a remote corner of the duchy, but as part of a much larger historical and spiritual context. The Duke's actions were not just a threat to the Fenlanders. They were a potential disruption of an ancient equilibrium that could have far-reaching consequences for the entire region. Eleanor, meanwhile, contributed her own insights, her artistic eye noticing subtle similarities in the decorative motifs found in Fenlander artifacts and those depicted in ancient Eldorian carvings. Her observations further supported Master Elias's theory of a shared cultural heritage and interconnected spiritual beliefs. The Collegium Sapientiae, far from being a mere refuge, had become a center of discovery, a place where the secrets of the wooden box and the plight of the Shadowfen were being illuminated by the wisdom of the past. Alexander and Eleanor found themselves at the heart of an intellectual quest that transcended their personal danger, a pursuit of understanding that held the key to protecting an ancient balance and potentially averting a regional crisis. The librarian's lore had opened a window into a deeper history, revealing the intricate connections that bound the land and its people to powerful, unseen forces, and underscoring the profound danger of the Duke's reckless ambition. Their silent oath now carried the weight of this ancient knowledge, a responsibility to not only survive but to also safeguard a heritage that stretched back millennia. Chapter 19. The Cartographer's Clues. Mapping the Unseen. The meticulous art of cartography, the way lines and symbols on a map can represent not only physical landscapes but also hidden pathways and forgotten boundaries. Imagine a scholar poring over ancient charts, seeking not just geographical information but also clues to historical events and the subtle influences that shape a region. Observe the way seemingly insignificant details can unlock profound insights, revealing patterns that were previously unseen. This is the task that now occupies Alexander within the Collegium Sapientiae, guided by Master Elias towards a collection of antique maps that might hold the key to understanding the Duke's obsession with the Shadowfen. Master Elias, his mind sparked by the revelations uncovered in the ancient texts, directed Alexander's attention towards the Collegium's collection of antique maps. These were not merely navigational charts but often contained annotations, marginalia, and symbolic representations that hinted at historical events, territorial disputes, and even local folklore. Master Elias believed that within these aged depictions of the duchy and its surrounding lands, they might find clues to the Duke's specific interest in the Shadowfen, beyond a general desire for power. They spent days unrolling brittle parchment maps, their surfaces faded and creased with age. Some depicted the duchy as it existed centuries ago, revealing shifting borders and the names of long-vanished settlements. Others, drawn by itinerant cartographers, offered more detailed depictions of the less explored regions, including the enigmatic Shadowfen. One map, dating back several centuries and attributed to a cartographer known for his interest in local legends, caught Alexander's eye. It depicted the Shadowfen with a surprising level of detail, marking not only waterways and terrain but also specific locations with unusual symbols. Among these symbols, Alexander recognized a recurring motif, a stylized depiction of a heartwood tree, often associated with a serpentine line that seemed to represent a waterway or perhaps a more symbolic connection to the land. Intriguingly, several of these heartwood tree symbols were also marked with small, almost imperceptible annotations in an archaic script that Alexander was beginning to recognize as a precursor to the Fenlander's current tongue. With Master Elias's help, they painstakingly deciphered these annotations. They spoke of places of power, convergences of the unseen, and where the veil thins during the Great Conjunction. One particular location, marked with a prominent heartwood symbol and surrounded by a cluster of these annotations, lay deep within the Shadowfen, in a region not typically inhabited by the Fenlanders according to other maps. This location was also depicted near a significant confluence of several waterways, a detail that resonated with the hermit's description of the heartwood tree's powerful connection to the land's spiritual energies. Another map, much later in origin but bearing the marks of a meticulous and perhaps secretive cartographer, showed the Shadowfen with an overlay of geological features. Alexander noticed that the area marked with the prominent heartwood symbol coincided with a region known for unusual mineral deposits, particularly a type of luminescent moss that was unique to the faun and was said to possess certain unusual properties. Master Elias recalled a passage from one of the ancient texts that spoke of this moss, describing it as a conduit for the land's spiritual energy, particularly potent during the celestial alignment. It was also mentioned as being highly sought after for certain arcane practices. A chilling realization dawned on Alexander. The Duke's interest in the Shadowfen might not be solely about controlling the Faun Walker's power in a general sense. He might be after a specific resource within the Faun, a resource tied to the ancient pact and amplified during the celestial alignment, the luminescent moss. Lord Valerius's strange metallic device now took on a more sinister significance. Perhaps it was designed to extract or manipulate this moss, to harness its unique properties for the Duke's own ends. The cartographer's clues had provided a crucial piece of the puzzle. The Duke's obsession with the Shadowfen seemed to be rooted in a desire to exploit a tangible resource, a resource deeply connected to the ancient pact and its power source. This explained the urgency of his actions during the approaching celestial alignment, the time when the moss's properties and the Faun Walker's power would be at their peak. Alexander and Master Elias shared their findings with Eleanor, who, with her keen eye for detail, pointed out that the stylized heartwood symbol on the oldest map bore a subtle resemblance to a sigil associated with a minor noble family from the duchy's history, a family known for their interest in alchemy and arcane practices, the Valerius family. This connection sent a shiver down Alexander's spine. Lord Valerius's involvement was not just that of a loyal advisor carrying out the Duke's orders. It suggested a deeper, perhaps even ancestral, interest in the Shadowfen and its secrets. Perhaps the Valerius family had long sought to exploit the power of the Faun, and Lord Valerius saw the Duke's ambition as an opportunity to finally achieve that goal. The antique maps, with their faded lines and cryptic symbols, had painted a clearer picture of the unseen forces at play. The Duke's ambition was intertwined with the lure of a specific resource, amplified by a celestial event, and potentially driven by the long-standing aspirations of a powerful noble family. The race against time to protect the Shadowfen and its ancient pact had taken on a new dimension, a struggle not just against greed for power, but against a potentially long-held desire to exploit a sacred and powerful place. Their silent oath now included the responsibility of understanding the full scope of the Duke's ambition, a task illuminated by the cartographer's silent testament to a hidden history. Chapter 20. The Looming Conjunction, a Desperate Gambit. The convergence of celestial events and earthly intentions, the way the alignment of stars can amplify both natural energies and human ambitions. Imagine the tension building as a critical moment approaches, a point of no return where destinies will be decided. Observe the desperate planning of a final gambit, the need to act decisively with limited information and against overwhelming odds. This is the precarious situation Alexander and Eleanor now face, the looming great conjunction forcing them to make a perilous choice. The revelations gleaned from the ancient texts and maps within the Collegium Sapientiae painted a grim picture. The Duke's ambition, fueled by Lord Valerius's potentially long-standing desire to exploit the Shadowfen's power, was hurtling towards a dangerous climax with a rapidly approaching great conjunction. They understood the stakes: the disruption of an ancient pact, the potential unleashing of a powerful guardian's wrath, and the exploitation of a sacred land for selfish gain. Remaining in the Collegium's sanctuary while the Duke's plans unfolded was no longer an option. They had to act. "We need to return," Alexander said to Eleanor, his voice filled with a resolute determination that mirrored her own. "We need to warn the Fenlanders directly of the Duke's specific interest in the luminescent moss and the amplified danger during the conjunction." Eleanor nodded, her face etched with concern but her eyes firm. "And we need to find a way to counteract whatever device Valerius has built. If it's designed to extract or control the moss's power, we need to understand how it works and how to stop it." Master Elias, having followed their discoveries with a growing sense of alarm, offered his counsel. Direct confrontation with the Duke in Ethelberg would be futile, perhaps suicidal. He is entrenched in his power, and his paranoia will only have intensified after Valerius's failure. "You would be walking into a trap." He suggested a more clandestine approach. Lyra's network of contacts might provide a way to slip back into the duchy undetected and to reach the Shadowfen before the Duke's forces could fully mobilize for a second attempt. Alexander, recalling the Fenlanders' fierce protectiveness of their land and their connection to the Fawn Walker, believed that if they could present them with concrete evidence of the Duke's specific intentions regarding the luminescent moss, they would be even more resolute in their defense. Their plan began to take shape. They would utilize Lyra's network to travel swiftly and secretly back towards the Shadowfen. Alexander would carry detailed sketches of the relevant sections of the antique maps, highlighting the location of the heartwood tree and the areas rich in the luminescent moss. He would also bring copies of the translated passages from the ancient texts that spoke of the moss's power and the dangers of disrupting the pact during the conjunction. Eleanor, with her keen observation skills, would focus on any signs of increased military activity or unusual movements within the duchy as they traveled. Master Elias, drawing upon his vast knowledge, provided Alexander with information about potential weaknesses in the type of arcane technology Lord Valerius might be employing, based on historical precedents and theoretical constructs found in the Collegium's more esoteric texts. While he could not know the specifics of Valerius's device, he offered insights into common vulnerabilities in such contraptions, often involving disruptions of energy flow or the manipulation of specific resonant frequencies. The looming Great Conjunction served as a stark reminder of the limited time they had. They needed to reach the Shadowfen before the celestial alignment reached its peak, before the Duke's forces could implement their plan and potentially unleash irreversible consequences. Their departure from the Collegium was as discreet as their arrival. Master Elias provided them with provisions and offered his heartfelt blessings for their perilous undertaking. They knew they were venturing back into danger, but the weight of responsibility for the Shadowfen and its ancient pact compelled them forward. The journey back was a tense race against time. They moved swiftly under the cover of darkness, relying on Lyra's contacts for safe passage and avoiding any encounters with the Duke's patrols. Eleanor's observations proved invaluable, noting increased military presence along certain routes, confirming that the Duke was indeed mobilizing forces towards the north. As they neared the fringes of the Shadowfen once more, the familiar dampness in the air and the eerie silence of the mire felt both familiar and foreboding. The great conjunction was only days away, the anticipation of the celestial event palpable even in the natural world. The fate of the Shadowfen, and perhaps their own, hung precariously in the balance, dependent on their desperate gambit to reach the Fenlanders in time and to somehow thwart the Duke's reckless ambition before the stars aligned and unleashed forces beyond their full comprehension. Their silent oath had led them back into the heart of the danger, driven by a commitment to protect an ancient harmony against a looming storm. Chapter 21. The Fenlanders stand, preparing for the confluence. The unwavering resolve of a community united in the face of a common threat, their deep-seated connection to their traditions providing a source of strength. Imagine the quiet preparations for a confrontation, the reliance on ancient knowledge and the wisdom of their elders. Observe the blend of apprehension and determination as they prepare to defend their sacred land and their way of life. This is the scene Alexander and Eleanor now encounter as they finally reach the Fenlanders once more, the looming conjunction casting a long shadow over their preparations. Their arrival at the familiar clearing within the Shadowfen was met with a mixture of relief and grim anticipation. The Fenlanders, alerted by Lyra's swift messengers, were already preparing for the Duke's return. Gone was the initial wariness they had shown Alexander. In its place was a quiet resolve, a steely determination etched on their faces. The elder woman greeted them with a nod, her wise eyes conveying both gratitude for their return and a deep understanding of the gravity of the situation. She explained that since the Duke's first failed attempt, they had strengthened their defenses, relying on their knowledge of the treacherous terrain and the protective energies of the Heartwood. Alexander quickly shared the information gleaned from the Collegium's archives, spreading out the sketches of the antique maps and the translated passages from the ancient texts. He highlighted the specific locations rich in the luminescent moss and explained its potent connection to the Fawn Walker, particularly during the approaching Great Conjunction. The Fenlanders listened intently, their understanding of the Duke's motives deepening with each revelation. The elder woman confirmed their long-held knowledge of the moss's unique properties and its importance in their rituals. The Duke's desire to exploit it during the conjunction was seen as a profound sacrilege, a direct threat to the delicate balance of their pact. "He seeks to steal the very breath of our land," one of the younger Fenlanders said, his voice filled with a quiet fury. "He does not understand that to take without respect is to invite destruction." The elder woman outlined their plan. They would not confront the Duke's forces directly in open battle. Their strength lay in their knowledge of the Shadowfen, its hidden paths, and the protective energies that permeated the land, especially around the Heartwood. They would use the terrain to their advantage, creating obstacles and diversions to slow the Duke's advance. Crucially, they would also focus their energies on the Heartwood tree as the conjunction approached. The elder woman explained that during this time, their connection to the Fawn Walker would be at its strongest. They would perform the ancient song of appeasement with renewed fervor, channeling their collective energy to protect the Heartwood and, by extension, the balance of their pact. Alexander, recalling Master Elias's insights into arcane technology, shared his understanding of potential weaknesses in Valerius's device. He suggested focusing on disrupting any energy conduits or interfering with resonant frequencies if they encountered it again. Eleanor, ever observant, noticed the intricate patterns woven into the Fenlanders' garments and their simple tools. She recognized recurring motifs that seemed to mirror the symbols on the wooden box and the antique maps. She learned that these patterns were not merely decorative but held symbolic significance, representing their connection to the land, the Fawn Walker, and the ancient pact. She suggested that these symbols might hold a key to understanding or even influencing the flow of energy during the conjunction. As the hours ticked away, drawing them closer to the celestial alignment, the Fenlanders prepared with a quiet intensity. They gathered near the Heartwood tree, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the luminescent moss that grew in abundance around its base. The air hummed with a palpable energy, a sense of anticipation and focused intent. Lyra, her loyalty now firmly with the Finlanders, moved among them, offering her knowledge of the terrain and helping to coordinate their defenses. She had become an unlikely bridge between the outsiders and the hidden community, her initial wariness replaced by a deep respect for their traditions and their resilience. Alexander and Eleanor stood alongside the Finlanders, their earlier roles as mere observers now transformed into that of allies in a shared cause. They felt a profound sense of responsibility, a commitment to stand with these people who had welcomed them and shared their ancient wisdom. As the first hints of the celestial alignment began to manifest, a subtle shift in the quality of the light filtering through the mist, a heightened sense of energy in the air, the Finlanders began their ancient song. Their voices, rising in unison, echoed through the silent fun, a powerful invocation that resonated with the very heart of the Shadowfen, a defiant stand against the encroaching darkness of the Duke's ambition, a plea to their guardian spirit as the confluence of worlds drew near. The silent oath they all now shared was a promise to protect this sacred place and its ancient power, a commitment forged in the face of a looming threat and the approaching celestial convergence. Chapter 22: The Confluence of Power, a Reckoning in the Mire. The moment when celestial and earthly energies align, a confluence of power that can amplify intentions, both benevolent and malevolent. Imagine the tension of a confrontation reaching its peak, the forces of tradition clashing with the ambition of power. Observe the unleashing of raw, untamed energy as ancient pacts are tested. This is the climactic scene that now unfolds in the heart of the Shadowfen, the great conjunction arriving as the Duke's forces descend upon the Finlanders. As the celestial alignment reached its zenith, a palpable surge of energy coursed through the Shadowfen. The luminescent moss around the heartwood pulsed with an almost blinding intensity, casting an ethereal glow over the clearing. The Finlanders' ancient song swelled in volume and intensity, their voices resonating with the heightened power of the conjunction, a defiant beacon in the mist-shrouded fun. It was then that the Duke's forces arrived. Led by a grim-faced Lord Valerius, a contingent of heavily armed soldiers emerged from the surrounding mire, their armor glinting ominously in the otherworldly light. They moved with a renewed determination, their earlier fear seemingly replaced by the Duke's unwavering command. "Seize the heartwood," Valerius bellowed, his voice echoing through the clearing. "The Duke demands it." The soldiers advanced, their weapons raised, but the Finlanders stood their ground, their faces resolute. They held no swords or shields, but their connection to the land and the power of their song formed an invisible barrier. As the Duke's men drew closer to the heartwood, the air around the ancient tree crackled with energy. The luminous moss flared, and tendrils of light snaked outwards, creating shimmering patterns in the air that mirrored the intricate symbols woven into the Finlanders' garments. Alexander, remembering Eleanor's observation about the symbolic power of these patterns, had a sudden insight. "The symbols," he exclaimed to the elder woman. "They are conduits. Focus your song through them." The elder woman understood instantly. She raised her hands, her fingers tracing the patterns on her own robe, and the other Finlanders followed suit, focusing their intent on the ancient symbols that represented their connection to the Fawn Walker and the Pact. As they channeled their song through these symbols, the tendrils of light intensified, forming a protective shield around the heartwood tree, and the Finlanders gathered at its base. When the Duke's soldiers crashed against this invisible barrier, they were thrown back, recoiling as if struck by an unseen force. Lord Valerius watched in disbelief as his men were repelled. His earlier arrogance began to crumble, replaced by a flicker of the same bewildered apprehension he had shown during their first encounter. He gestured frantically at the soldiers with the strange metallic device. "Activate the resonator," he shrieked. "Overload their defenses." The soldiers struggled to maneuver the device through the dense energy field surrounding the heartwood. As they finally managed to position it, Valerius activated it with a triumphant sneer. The device whirred and glowed, emitting a high-pitched whine that seemed to clash discordantly with the Fenlander's ancient song. But the resonator did not have the effect Valerius intended. Instead of disrupting the Fenlander's connection, the discordant frequency seemed to agitate the raw energy of the conjunction, causing it to fluctuate wildly. The light from the heartwood flickered erratically, and the protective shield around the Fenlanders pulsed unpredictably. Master Elias's warnings about disrupting resonant frequencies echoed in Alexander's mind. He realized that Valerius's device was attempting to force the ancient power, but the chaotic energy of the conjunction was resisting this crude manipulation. "It's unstable," Alexander yelled to Lyra. "If he overloads it, it could unleash uncontrolled energy." Lyra, with her knowledge of the terrain, pointed to a series of submerged pathways that led behind the Duke's forces. "We can flank them," she shouted, "if we can disrupt the device." As the Fenlanders continued their powerful song, maintaining the protective shield as best they could against the fluctuating energy, Alexander and Lyra, followed by a group of agile Fenlanders, moved swiftly through the hidden waterways, aiming to outmaneuver the Duke's men. They emerged behind the soldiers just as Valerius, his face contorted with frustration, began to crank the resonator to its maximum setting. The device glowed intensely, its whining reaching a fever pitch. "Now!" Alexander yelled. They surged forward, the Fenlanders using their knowledge of the slippery terrain to their advantage. Lyra, quick and decisive, hurled a heavy piece of driftwood, striking the resonator with a resounding crack. The device sputtered violently, sparks flying from its intricate mechanisms. The high-pitched whine abruptly ceased, replaced by a series of grinding noises and a final, ominous silence. The uncontrolled energy of the conjunction, no longer focused by Valerius's device, surged outwards. A wave of raw power washed over the clearing. The luminous moss flared brilliantly, the heartwood tree pulsed with an overwhelming light, and the very air vibrated with an almost unbearable intensity. The Duke's soldiers cried out in fear and confusion as the unleashed energy buffeted them. In the midst of this chaotic surge of power, the Fawn Walker's presence became undeniable. The swirling mists coalesced into a majestic, serpentine form, its eyes glowing with an ancient wisdom and a profound displeasure. It moved with a fluid grace, its immense form dwarfing the Duke's soldiers, its silent gaze fixed on Lord Valerius. Valerius, his face pale with terror, finally understood the magnitude of his folly. He had sought to control a power he could not comprehend, and now he faced its full, untamed fury in the heart of the mire, as the confluence of worlds reached its peak. The reckoning had arrived. Chapter 23, The Mire's Judgment, Echoes of the Ancient Law. The concept of natural justice, the way the balance of the world can reassert itself when disrupted by human greed and ambition. Imagine the power of an ancient guardian, a force deeply connected to the land, delivering a silent but undeniable judgment. Observe the consequences of such an encounter, the fear and awe it inspires in those who witness it. This is the fate that now befalls Lord Valerius and the Duke's remaining forces in the heart of the Shadowfen, as the Fawn Walker makes its presence known. The majestic, serpentine form that coalesced from the swirling mists held an undeniable aura of ancient power. Its luminous eyes, like pools of liquid moonlight, fixed upon Lord Valerius, who stood frozen in terror, his face a mask of utter disbelief. The unleashed energy of the conjunction pulsed around the Fawn Walker, illuminating its immense form and casting long, dancing shadows across the clearing. A profound silence descended, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the muddy banks and the ragged breathing of the Duke's terrified soldiers. The Fenlanders, their song now a low, resonant hum, watched with a mixture of awe and a quiet sense of vindication. The balance of their world, threatened by the Duke's ambition, was being restored. The Fawn Walker did not move with haste or aggression. Its presence alone seemed to exert an immense pressure, a silent judgment upon those who had dared to trespass and attempt to exploit its power. The remaining soldiers, witnessing the raw majesty of the Guardian, began to flee, stumbling through the mire in a desperate attempt to escape the clearing. Lord Valerius, however, remained rooted to the spot, his eyes wide with a horrified fascination. The ambition that had driven him, the greed that had blinded him to the true nature of the Shadowfen, now dissolved into a primal fear. He finally understood that he had meddled with forces far beyond his comprehension. The Fawn Walker slowly turned its gaze towards the broken remains of Valerius's metallic device, its luminous eyes seeming to pierce through the twisted metal and arcane components. A low, resonant sound emanated from the Guardian, a sound that vibrated not just through the air but through the very bones of those who heard it, a sound that spoke of ancient laws and the consequences of their violation. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, the Fawn Walker extended a massive, ethereal appendage towards Valerius. It was not a gesture of violence, but one of profound finality. A wave of pure energy emanated from the Guardian, washing over the Lord. He did not cry out, did not struggle. His body simply dissolved, as if his very essence was being absorbed back into the mire, becoming one with the land he had sought to exploit. A collective gasp rippled through the Fenlanders. Even Alexander and Eleanor, who had witnessed the Guardian's power before, were awestruck by this display of silent judgment. The mire had claimed its own. The ancient law of balance had been upheld. With Valerius gone, and the remaining soldiers scattered in terror, the Fawn Walker turned its gaze towards Alexander and Eleanor. For a moment, they felt a surge of apprehension, unsure of how the Guardian perceived their presence. But then, the luminous eyes seemed to soften, a flicker of something akin to recognition passing through them. After a long, silent moment, the majestic form slowly began to dissipate, dissolving back into the swirling mists, leaving behind an eerie calm. The conjunction began to wane, the intense glow of the luminescent moss gradually fading, the heightened energy in the air subsiding. The heartwood tree stood silent once more, its ancient presence a reassuring constant. The elder woman approached Alexander and Eleanor, her face etched with a profound sense of relief and gratitude. "The Guardian has spoken," she said softly. "The balance has been restored. You helped us, strangers. You stood with us." Lyra, who had witnessed the entire spectacle with a mixture of fear and awe, nodded in agreement. "I have never doubted the power of the Fun," she said, her voice hushed. "But what I have seen tonight, it is beyond anything I could have imagined." The immediate threat to the Shadowfen had been neutralized, but Alexander knew that the Duke's ambition would not simply vanish. He would likely hear of Valerius's demise and the rout of his forces, and his fury would undoubtedly be terrible. "We need to leave the Fun," Alexander said to Eleanor. "The Duke will be seeking retribution. Our presence here puts the Fenlanders at further risk." The elder woman understood. "Go in peace," she said. "The Fun will protect its own. And we will not forget your courage." With heavy hearts but a sense of accomplishment, Alexander and Eleanor, guided by Lyra, made their way back towards the edge of the Shadowfen. They left behind a community that had faced a grave threat and, with the aid of an ancient power, had prevailed. As they emerged from the mist-shrouded depths of the mire, the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky. They were fugitives once more, but they carried the knowledge of what they had witnessed, the power of an ancient pact and the judgment of a land protecting its own. Their journey was far from over, but they knew that they had played a part in safeguarding a sacred place, and the echoes of the Fawn Walker's power would stay with them, a reminder of the forces that lay hidden beneath the surface of the world. The silent oath they shared now carried the weight of this profound experience, a bond forged in the face of ancient power and the Mire's silent judgment. Chapter 24. The Duke's Shadow, a Kingdom Divided. The far-reaching consequences of a ruler's unchecked ambition and the way a single act of aggression can sow seeds of dissent and division within a kingdom. Imagine the fear and uncertainty that grip a populace under the rule of a volatile and vengeful leader. Observe the subtle shifts in loyalty and the quiet murmurings of rebellion that begin to stir in the shadows. This is the fractured landscape of the duchy that Alexander and Eleanor now re-enter, the Duke's wrath casting a long shadow over the land. Their return to the more settled regions of the duchy was marked by an oppressive atmosphere. News of Lord Valerius's disastrous expedition and his subsequent demise in the Shadowfen had spread like wildfire, though the true nature of the Fawn Walker's intervention remained shrouded in rumor and fear. The Duke, refusing to acknowledge any supernatural involvement, had instead declared Alexander and the Fenlanders responsible for Valerius's death and the humiliation of his forces. A wave of paranoia had gripped the ducal court. Suspicion fell upon anyone who had shown even the slightest interest in the northern territories or questioned the Duke's authority. The Duke's guards were everywhere, their presence a constant reminder of his absolute power and his vengeful nature. Fearful whispers circulated among the populace, tales of the Duke's increasing tyranny and the strange events in the Shadowfen fueling unrest. Lyra, ever resourceful, guided Alexander and Eleanor along hidden trails and through sympathetic communities, avoiding the main roads and the Duke's patrols. She explained that many within the duchy, particularly those living in the northern regions, harbored resentment towards the Duke's heavy-handed rule and his disregard for local traditions. The events in the Shadowfen, though terrifying, had also sparked a sense of defiance in some, a whisper of hope that the Duke's power might not be absolute. As they traveled, Eleanor, with her artistic skills, began to document the symbols and patterns she had observed among the Fenlanders, recognizing their potential significance. Alexander, drawing upon his knowledge of history and folklore, saw parallels between the Duke's actions and the downfall of other rulers who had disregarded ancient traditions and the spiritual beliefs of their people. Their aim was to reach the Collegium Sapientiae once more, to share their experiences and the knowledge they had gained with Master Elias and the other scholars. They hoped that within the Collegium's walls, they could find a way to understand the broader implications of the events in the Shadowfen and perhaps even find allies who might be willing to challenge the Duke's increasingly erratic rule. However, their journey was fraught with peril. The Duke's spies were everywhere, their eyes and ears reaching into the most unexpected corners of the duchy. They had to be constantly vigilant, their trust placed only in Lyra and her network of discreet contacts. One evening, seeking shelter in a remote village known for its independent spirit, they encountered a group of individuals gathered in secret, their voices hushed but filled with a quiet anger. They were discussing the Duke's recent decrees, his increased taxation, and his heavy-handed response to the events in the Shadowfen. They spoke of a growing discontent among the populace, a feeling that the Duke had gone too far. Alexander and Eleanor listened cautiously, realizing that the Duke's actions were indeed sowing seeds of division within his kingdom. The fear he instilled was being slowly replaced by a simmering resentment. Lyra, recognizing some of the individuals, discreetly made their presence known. To their surprise, they were met not with suspicion but with a cautious curiosity and a shared sense of unease about the Duke's rule. Alexander, sensing an opportunity, carefully shared a sanitized version of their experiences in the Shadowfen, emphasizing the Duke's aggression and the Fenlanders' courageous defense of their traditions. They found a sympathetic ear among these villagers, individuals who felt a connection to the ancient ways and who were wary of the Duke's disregard for them. It became clear that the Duke's heavy-handed response to the Shadowfen incident was alienating a significant portion of his populace, creating cracks in the foundation of his authority. As they continued their journey, they encountered more such pockets of resistance, quiet murmurings of dissent that hinted at a kingdom increasingly divided under the Duke's shadow. The fear was still pervasive, but beneath it, a sense of defiance was beginning to stir. Their return to the Collegium Sapientiae was a relief. Master Elias and the other scholars listened intently to their account of the events in the Shadowfen and the volatile political climate within the duchy. They recognized the significance of the Fawn Walker's intervention and the potential for the Duke's actions to destabilize the entire region. The Collegium, a haven of knowledge and independent thought, became a center for discussion and analysis. The scholars debated the historical precedents for such events, the potential consequences of disrupting ancient pacts, and the ethical implications of their knowledge. A sense of responsibility settled upon them. They possessed a unique understanding of the forces at play, and they could not simply stand by while the Duke's tyranny threatened to engulf the duchy. The silent oath they shared now extended beyond their own survival and the protection of the Shadowfen. It included a growing sense of obligation to the wider populace, a recognition that the Duke's shadow was falling over a kingdom increasingly ripe for change. Their next steps, they knew, would need to be carefully considered, potentially involving not just escape but a more direct engagement with the forces dividing the duchy. Chapter 25: Seeds of Rebellion, a Gathering of Discontent. The subtle ways in which resistance can take root in the cracks of an oppressive regime, the quiet acts of defiance that can blossom into open rebellion. Imagine individuals from disparate backgrounds finding common ground in their shared discontent, their whispers of frustration evolving into a unified voice of opposition. Observe the delicate process of building trust and forging alliances in the face of danger. This is the burgeoning movement that Alexander and Eleanor now find themselves drawn into, the seeds of rebellion sprouting in the fertile ground of the Duke's tyranny. Within the relative safety of the Collegium Sapientiae, Alexander and Eleanor found themselves increasingly sought out by individuals who had heard whispers of their experiences in the Shadowfen and their defiance of the Duke. These were not just scholars curious about ancient lore, they were individuals from various walks of life, disgruntled nobles, disenfranchised merchants, even former members of the Duke's Guard, all united by their growing dissatisfaction with his increasingly erratic and tyrannical rule. Master Elias, with his extensive network of contacts throughout the duchy, facilitated these discreet meetings within the Collegium's walls. He recognized the potential for Alexander and Eleanor, with their first-hand knowledge of the Duke's aggression and the power they had witnessed in the Shadowfen, to become catalysts for a wider resistance movement. One of the first to seek them out was Lord Elmsworth, a nobleman from a northern territory who had long chafed under the Duke's heavy taxation and his disregard for the traditions of the northern lords. He had heard rumors of the Duke's disastrous foray into the Shadowfen and was intrigued by the whispers of an ancient power that had repelled his forces. Elmsworth saw in Alexander and Eleanor individuals who had stood against the Duke and survived, a symbol of hope for those who felt powerless. Another visitor was a shrewd merchant named Anya, whose had suffered under the Duke's arbitrary decrees and his confiscation of goods. She spoke of a growing unrest among the merchant guilds, a feeling that the Duke's greed was stifling the duchy's prosperity. Anya offered her network of contacts and her resources to aid any movement against the Duke. Even more surprisingly, they were approached by a former captain of the Duke's Guard, a man named Kalen, who had become disillusioned by the Duke's cruelty and his willingness to sacrifice his own men in his reckless pursuit of power. Kalen offered his knowledge of the Duke's military strength and his network of loyalists within the Guard who were also growing weary of the Duke's tyranny. As Alexander and Eleanor shared their story with these individuals, emphasizing the Duke's disregard for ancient traditions and the potential danger he posed to the entire duchy by disrupting the balance of the Shadowfen, a sense of common purpose began to emerge. They found themselves at the center of a burgeoning movement, a quiet gathering of discontent fueled by the Duke's own actions. The Collegium Sapientiae, once a sanctuary of learning, was slowly transforming into a clandestine meeting place, a hub for the nascent rebellion. Master Elias, while cautious, offered his support, providing them with meeting rooms and ensuring their activities remained discreet. He understood that the pursuit of justice sometimes required more than just scholarly inquiry. The discussions were cautious and strategic. They recognized the Duke's strength and the risks involved in open rebellion. Their initial focus was on building a network of trusted allies, spreading awareness of the Duke's tyranny, and subtly undermining his authority. Eleanor's artistic skills proved invaluable once more, as she began to create discrete pamphlets and symbols that represented their growing movement, drawing inspiration from the Finlanders' powerful iconography. Alexander, drawing upon his knowledge of history, spoke of successful rebellions against tyrannical rulers, emphasizing the importance of unity, strategic planning, and understanding the grievances of the populace. He stressed the need to move cautiously, to build support from the ground up, and to choose their moment wisely. The shadow of the Duke still loomed large over the duchy, but within the quiet halls of the Collegium and in the hidden corners of the land, seeds of rebellion were being sown. Disparate individuals, united by their discontent, were beginning to find a common voice, their whispers of frustration slowly coalescing into a potential storm. Alexander and Eleanor, initially seeking only refuge and knowledge, now found themselves at the heart of this growing resistance, their silent oath to protect the secrets of the Shadowfen evolving into a commitment to the liberation of a kingdom held captive by a tyrant's shadow. The gathering of discontent had begun, and the path towards a reckoning, though fraught with peril, was slowly being illuminated. Chapter 26. Whispers in the Citadel. Seeds of Doubt. The insidious nature of doubt, the way it can erode even the most steadfast loyalties when fueled by injustice and fear. Imagine the subtle spread of dissent within the very heart of a ruler's power, the hushed conversations and furtive glances among those who serve him. Observe how the actions of a tyrant can sow the seeds of his own undoing within his inner circle. This is the subtle shift that now begins to occur within the Duke's citadel, as the whispers of discontent reach even the ears of those closest to him. News of the Duke's increasingly erratic behavior and the growing unrest in the duchy did not remain confined to the outer reaches of his influence. Within the very walls of the citadel, among the nobles, advisers, and even some members of his personal guard, whispers of doubt began to circulate. The disastrous expedition to the Shadowfen, the mysterious demise of Lord Valerius, and the Duke's increasingly paranoid and vengeful decrees had begun to erode the loyalty of those who had once served him without question. Lady Beatrice, a noblewoman of considerable influence and sharp intellect, had long observed the Duke's descent into tyranny with growing concern. She had seen his initial pragmatism give way to unchecked ambition, his firm rule hardening into cruelty. The events in the Shadowfen, shrouded in rumor and the Duke's furious denials, struck her as particularly disturbing. She had known Lord Valerius, a man not prone to fanciful tales, and his terrified accounts before his sudden, unexplained death had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. She began to discreetly seek out others within the court who shared her unease. In hushed conversations in dimly lit corridors and veiled exchanges during formal gatherings, she found allies among those who valued justice and stability over blind obedience. They spoke of the Duke's isolation, his reliance on fear, and the growing resentment among the populace. Captain Elias, a veteran officer in the Duke's Guard who had served the family for decades, was another who found himself increasingly troubled. He had witnessed the Duke's ruthlessness firsthand, but the events in the Shadowfen and the subsequent purges within the Guard, targeting anyone suspected of questioning the official narrative, had shaken his loyalty. He had lost good men, brave soldiers, simply because they had expressed doubts about the Duke's version of events. Elias began to conduct his own discreet inquiries, seeking to understand what truly happened in the Shadowfen. He spoke to the few surviving soldiers who had returned, their accounts fragmented and terrified, but hinting at a power beyond their comprehension. He also noted the Duke's unusual interest in ancient texts and maps in the ducal library before the ill-fated expedition, a detail that suggested a deeper motive than mere resource acquisition. The whispers of discontent began to spread among the lower ranks of the Citadel staff as well. Servants overheard hushed arguments between the Duke and his remaining advisers, their voices strained with disagreement. Messengers arrived with reports of unrest in the northern territories and the growing popularity of the Shadowfen incident as a symbol of the Duke's folly. Eleanor's discreet pamphlets and symbols, subtly introduced into the city through Anya's network, began to find their way into the citadel as well, carried by disgruntled servants and sympathetic guards. The stylized serpent and water lily, a potent symbol of the Fenlanders' resilience, began to appear in unexpected places, a silent reminder of the power that had defied the Duke. The Duke, consumed by his paranoia and his thirst for revenge, remained largely oblivious to the growing dissent within his own stronghold. He was convinced that his iron fist would crush any opposition and that his version of events would prevail. He focused his energy on hunting down Alexander and Eleanor, offering a substantial reward for their capture, dead or alive. However, his obsession only served to further alienate those around him. They saw a ruler driven by vengeance rather than justice, a leader whose fear was leading him down a dangerous path. The seeds of doubt, once sown, began to take root, their tendrils reaching into the very foundations of the Duke's power. The Collegium's network of informants, subtly maintained by Master Elias, continued to provide Alexander and Eleanor with information about the shifting dynamics within the citadel. They learned of the growing unease among the nobles and the quiet inquiries being made by individuals like Lady Beatrice and Captain Elias. A realization began to dawn. The Duke's own actions were creating opportunities for resistance from within his own power base. The whispers of discontent in the citadel could potentially become a powerful force if nurtured and guided. The seeds of rebellion, planted in the wider duchy, were now finding fertile ground even within the Duke's shadow. The silent oath to resist tyranny might find unexpected allies in the very heart of the enemy's stronghold. Chapter 27. The Citadel's Divide, a Conspiracy of Whispers. The delicate and dangerous work of building a conspiracy within the walls of a hostile stronghold, the need for absolute secrecy and unwavering trust. Imagine individuals from opposing factions finding common ground in their shared desire for change, their hushed conversations weaving a tapestry of rebellion. Observe the subtle acts of defiance and the calculated risks taken to undermine a tyrant from within. This is the perilous endeavor that now unfolds within the Duke's citadel, as the seeds of doubt blossom into a conspiracy of whispers. The Collegium Sapientiae became a hub not only for outward resistance but also for the cultivation of contacts within the Duke's citadel. Master Elias, leveraging his long-standing but discreet connections within the city's influential circles, facilitated clandestine communications with individuals like Lady Beatrice and Captain Elias. The exchange of information was slow and fraught with risk, relying on trusted messengers and coded language, but it marked a significant turning point in their efforts. Lady Beatrice, using her social standing as a shield, began to subtly probe the loyalties of other nobles within the court. She identified several individuals who, while outwardly compliant with the Duke's decrees, privately expressed their concerns about his increasingly erratic behavior and the destabilizing effect it was having on the duchy. She painted a picture of a ruler consumed by vengeance and paranoia, alienating potential allies and sowing discord where there was once unity. Captain Elias, operating with even greater caution, began to identify officers and guards within the citadel who he believed shared his disillusionment. He sought out those who had served with honor and integrity, men who valued justice above blind obedience. His conversations were veiled, focusing on the importance of duty to the duchy as a whole, rather than to the Duke's personal whims. He spoke of the need for stability and the dangers of a ruler driven by fear and anger. The information gleaned from these internal contacts painted a picture of a citadel teetering on the brink of division. The Duke's inner circle was fracturing, with some advisors urging caution while others, blinded by ambition or fear, continued to fuel his paranoia and thirst for revenge. The rank and file of the guard were increasingly uneasy, their loyalty strained by the Duke's purges and the unsettling rumors surrounding the Shadowfen. Alexander and Eleanor, guided by Master Elias, carefully formulated messages of encouragement and subtle suggestions for action, tailored to the specific concerns of their contacts within the citadel. They emphasized the importance of unity and the potential for a return to stability if the Duke's tyrannical rule could be brought to an end. They stressed that their aim was not chaos but the restoration of justice and the well-being of the duchy. Eleanor's artistic talents were once again employed, this time in creating more sophisticated coded messages and symbols that could be discreetly shared within the citadel, acting as a silent language of resistance. The image of the intertwined serpent and water lily became a subtle mark of recognition among those who shared their discontent. The risks involved in this internal conspiracy were immense. Discovery would mean certain imprisonment, likely torture and execution. Yet, the growing desperation of the situation and the potential for a swift resolution if they could garner support within the citadel spurred them onward. One particularly crucial piece of information came from Captain Elias. He learned of the Duke's plans for a renewed assault on the Shadowfen, timed to coincide with the next minor celestial alignment, believing that the Fawn Walker's power would be diminished outside the Great Conjunction. He was gathering a larger force, fueled by his desire for revenge and a renewed determination to seize the luminescent moss. This news galvanized their efforts. They realized they had to act quickly, before the Duke could unleash another wave of violence upon the Fenlanders and further solidify his tyrannical grip on the duchy. The conspiracy within the citadel had to move from whispers to action. A daring plan began to take shape, a coordinated effort involving the external resistance, the Fenlanders, and their allies within the Duke's own stronghold. The goal was to confront the Duke directly, but not in open battle. Instead, they aimed to create a situation within the citadel that would force his hand, expose his tyranny to his own court and guards, and potentially lead to his removal from power. The whispers within the citadel were no longer just expressions of discontent. They were the first stirrings of a coordinated rebellion, a dangerous but necessary gamble for the future of the duchy. Alexander and Eleanor, from their sanctuary within the Collegium, found themselves orchestrating a delicate and perilous dance, relying on the courage and loyalty of those who dared to dream of a kingdom free from the Duke's shadow. The citadel was beginning to divide, and the conspiracy of whispers held the potential to become a thunderous roar. Chapter 28: The Gathering Storm, a Citadel on Edge. The palpable tension that precedes a major upheaval, the way a seemingly calm surface can conceal a storm of discontent brewing beneath. Imagine the intricate preparations for a coordinated action, the need for precise timing and unwavering commitment from disparate groups. Observe the subtle signs of an impending clash as a stronghold unknowingly prepares for its own internal disruption. This is the atmosphere that now permeates the Duke's citadel, unaware of the forces gathering against it. The plan, carefully orchestrated by Alexander, Eleanor, Master Elias, and their growing network of allies, began to unfold with a quiet urgency. Messengers, moving in secret through the duchy, carried coded instructions to the various factions of the burgeoning resistance. The timing was crucial, aligned with the Duke's preparations for his renewed assault on the Shadowfen, a moment when his attention would be divided and his forces stretched thin. Within the citadel, Lady Beatrice and Captain Elias worked with meticulous caution, solidifying their alliances and preparing for their roles in the internal disruption. Lady Beatrice used her influence to subtly sow further seeds of doubt among the nobility, highlighting the Duke's increasingly irrational behavior and the potential for his obsession with the Shadowfen to lead to the duchy's ruin. She painted a picture of a return to stability and prosperity under more reasonable leadership, subtly suggesting alternatives without explicitly calling for rebellion. Captain Elias, meanwhile, finalized his plans with the Loyalist guards within the citadel. Their objective was not to engage in open combat but to secure key locations, the armory, the main gates, and the Duke's private chambers, at a prearranged signal, effectively isolating the Duke and preventing him from deploying the full might of his forces. Their loyalty was not to the tyrant but to the duchy itself, and they believed that the Duke's actions were a grave threat to its future. Outside the citadel, Lyra coordinated with the leaders of the sympathetic villages and the disgruntled merchants. Their role was to create diversions, small acts of defiance and disruption in various parts of the duchy, drawing the Duke's attention and resources away from the citadel at the critical moment. These acts, ranging from staged bandit attacks on supply routes to peaceful protests in town squares, were designed to create chaos and sow further dissent among the populace. Alexander and Eleanor, still under the guise of scholars at the Collegium, remained the central point of coordination, receiving and disseminating information through Master Elias's network. They meticulously tracked the Duke's preparations for his Shadowfen expedition, noting the dates, the size of his forces, and the individuals he had placed in charge of the citadel in his absence. This information was vital for timing their move. The days leading up to the planned action were thick with a nervous anticipation. Within the citadel, the conspirators moved with a heightened sense of awareness, their hushed conversations and furtive glances barely concealed beneath a veneer of normalcy. The Duke, preoccupied with his impending assault on the Shadowfen, remained largely oblivious to the storm brewing within his own walls. Small acts of defiance began to surface within the citadel, subtle challenges to the Duke's authority that went largely unnoticed by the increasingly isolated ruler. A royal decree was subtly altered in its wording by a sympathetic scribe. A guard detail assigned to a loyalist captain was quietly reassigned. These small acts of sabotage were like pinpricks, slowly weakening the Duke's control. The atmosphere within the citadel was a strange mix of outward obedience and simmering resentment. The Duke's loyalists remained vigilant, but even they could sense the growing unease among their ranks. The whispers of the Shadowfen, the tales of the Fan Walker's power, and the rumors of a growing resistance had begun to sow seeds of doubt even among those who had previously been unwavering in their loyalty. As the date of the Duke's departure for the Shadowfen drew near, the various threads of the resistance began to converge. The stage was set for a coordinated action, a desperate gamble to wrest control of the duchy from the hands of a tyrant. The citadel, unknowingly, stood on the precipice of its own internal upheaval, the gathering storm of discontent about to break. The silent oath to restore justice was about to be tested in the heart of the Duke's power. Chapter 29. The Serpent Uncoils, a Citadel in Revolt. The explosive moment when simmering discontent erupts into open rebellion, the sudden shift from hushed whispers to decisive action. Imagine the chaos and confusion that grip a stronghold as its internal order collapses. Observe the courage of those who risk everything to challenge tyranny from within. This is the moment of reckoning that now descends upon the Duke's citadel, as the carefully laid plans of the resistance are put into motion. The morning of the Duke's planned departure for his renewed assault on the Shadowfen dawned with an air of deceptive normalcy over Ethelberg. The Duke, oblivious to the intricate web of resistance tightening around him, bustled with preparations, eager to finally seize the power he believed awaited him in the mire. His forces were assembled, his banners unfurled, and his departure seemed imminent. But beneath this veneer of order, the carefully laid plans of the resistance were about to be unleashed. The signal, a prearranged sequence of bells from the city's oldest cathedral, echoed through the citadel. It was the cue for Lady Beatrice, Captain Elias, and their allies to act. Lady Beatrice, feigning illness, remained in her chambers, but her trusted servants moved swiftly, spreading carefully crafted rumors among the nobility about the Duke's instability and the potential consequences of his reckless obsession with the Shadowfen. They spoke of Valerius's final, terrified words, hinting at a power the Duke could not control, and questioned the wisdom of following a leader so clearly driven by vengeance. At the same time, Captain Elias, under the guise of routine guard rotations, subtly repositioned his loyalist guards to secure key locations within the citadel. Small, coordinated groups moved with quiet efficiency to take control of the armory, ensuring that weapons would be available to those who joined their cause. Other groups moved towards the main gates, preparing to bar entry to any loyalist reinforcements. Elias himself, accompanied by a hand-picked squad, made his way towards the Duke's private chambers. The initial actions were swift and largely unnoticed amidst the bustle of the Duke's departure preparations. However, as the cathedral bells continued their prearranged sequence, a sense of unease began to ripple through the citadel. The rumors spread by Lady Beatrice's servants began to take hold, and the unusual movements of the guards did not go entirely unnoticed. The first open act of defiance came at the main gates. As the Duke's vanguard prepared to depart, the guards under the command of Elias's loyalists suddenly barred their way, their swords drawn. Confusion erupted, followed by shouts and the clash of steel as loyalist guards clashed with those still blindly following the Duke's orders. Simultaneously, within the citadel's courtyard, a group of disgruntled soldiers, emboldened by the unfolding events and the subtle encouragement they had received, openly declared their allegiance to the duchy and their opposition to the Duke's tyranny. They were quickly joined by sympathetic servants and even a few lower-ranking nobles, their numbers growing as the news of the unfolding revolt spread. The sound of fighting reached the Duke in his private chambers, where he was making final preparations for his departure. Initially dismissing it as a minor squabble, he soon realized the gravity of the situation as Captain Elias and his guards burst through his doors. "Duke," Elias said, his voice firm but respectful, "you are under arrest. Your actions have endangered the duchy. We can no longer stand by and allow your tyranny to continue." The Duke, his face contorted with rage and disbelief, refused to yield. A brief but violent struggle ensued before Elias's guards managed to subdue him. As news of the Duke's arrest spread through the citadel, the remaining loyalist resistance began to crumble. Many of the guards, their loyalty already wavering, chose to lay down their arms rather than fight against their own countrymen. The tide had turned. Outside the citadel walls, the diversions orchestrated by Lyra and the resistance network began to take effect. Small fires broke out in the city, and groups of protesters, emboldened by the news from within the citadel, took to the streets, demanding the Duke's removal. The Duke's departing forces, caught between the unrest in the city and the unfolding revolt within the citadel, found themselves in disarray. The serpent of rebellion had uncoiled within the very heart of the Duke's power. The whispers of discontent had become a roar, and the citadel, once a symbol of his absolute authority, was now in the hands of those who sought justice and stability for the duchy. The carefully laid plans had succeeded, and the reign of the tyrant was teetering on the brink of collapse. The silent oath to resist tyranny had found its voice, and the kingdom held its breath, awaiting the dawn of a new era. Chapter 30. A New Dawn. The shadow recedes. The fragile hope that blossoms in the aftermath of tyranny, the arduous process of rebuilding trust and establishing a just order. Imagine a kingdom holding its breath, awaiting the promise of a new dawn after a long night of oppression. Observe the cautious steps taken towards reconciliation and the challenges of forging a shared future from the remnants of a divided past. This is the dawn that now breaks over the duchy, as the shadow of the Duke begins to recede. The immediate aftermath of the Duke's arrest was a whirlwind of activity and a palpable sense of relief that washed over Ethelberg and the surrounding duchy. The fighting within the citadel quickly subsided as the remaining loyalist forces, seeing the Duke in custody and faced with the overwhelming support for the revolt, chose to lay down their arms. The city erupted in cheers as the news spread, the populace pouring into the streets, celebrating their newfound liberation. Lady Beatrice and Captain Elias, now acting as the interim authority, worked swiftly to restore order and establish a provisional council to govern the duchy. They reached out to the leaders of the resistance movement, including representatives from the Collegium Sapientiae, the Northern Lords, and the merchant guilds, seeking their counsel and participation in shaping the future. Alexander and Eleanor, upon receiving news of the successful revolt, returned to Ethelberg, greeted as heroes by a populace eager to thank them for their role in challenging the Duke's tyranny. They found the citadel transformed, the oppressive atmosphere replaced by a cautious optimism. Lady Beatrice and Captain Elias welcomed them warmly, acknowledging their courage and their wisdom. The Provisional Council faced the daunting task of rebuilding trust and stability after the Duke's divisive rule. They immediately repealed his most unjust decrees, lowered excessive taxes, and began to investigate the abuses of power that had occurred under his reign. The process was complex and fraught with challenges, as old grievances and loyalties had to be navigated with care. One of the Council's first priorities was to address the situation in the Shadowfen. They sent a delegation, including Alexander and Eleanor, to meet with the Fenlanders, offering assurances of peaceful coexistence and respect for their ancient traditions. The Fenlanders, initially wary, were eventually won over by the Council's sincerity and their willingness to acknowledge the sanctity of the pact. A new era of understanding and cooperation began to dawn between the duchy and the hidden community of the Fun. The wooden box, which had been the catalyst for so much turmoil, was eventually entrusted to the Collegium Sapientiae, where it was to be preserved as a historical artifact, a reminder of the importance of respecting ancient knowledge and the potential consequences of unchecked ambition. The fate of the former Duke was a matter of much debate. Some within the Council called for swift justice, demanding retribution for his tyranny. Others, including Lady Beatrice and Master Elias, argued for a more measured approach, emphasizing the need for due process and a focus on healing the divisions within the duchy. Eventually, it was decided that the former Duke would be held accountable for his actions, but with a focus on establishing a just legal framework for the future, rather than simply seeking revenge. The duchy slowly began the arduous process of rebuilding, its people tentatively embracing the promise of a new dawn. The shadow of the Duke still lingered in the memories of many, but the courage of those who had stood against him, the unity forged in the face of oppression, and the wisdom of those who sought a more just future offered a beacon of hope. Alexander and Eleanor, though weary from their long ordeal, remained in Ethelberg, offering their counsel to the Provisional Council and assisting in the efforts to rebuild trust and understanding within the duchy. They had come seeking knowledge and found themselves at the heart of a revolution, their silent oath to protect a secret evolving into a commitment to the well-being of an entire kingdom. As the shadow of the Duke receded, the first rays of a new dawn illuminated the duchy, a dawn filled with the promise of justice, stability, and a renewed respect for the ancient connections that bound the land and its people. The journey ahead would undoubtedly be long and challenging, but the seeds of a more just future had been sown, and the hope for a brighter tomorrow had taken root in the fertile ground of liberation.